And unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
Yes.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and I've got a message for you. Welcome back to this blockbuster edition of What Just Happened. It really is a good one, I think. It's so funny that people keep calling me Meghan Markle, because it's Meghan Sussex now.
Flynn has said, Samara, I agree with you all the time, but you're just boring.
Hi! I refuse to work for ITV ever again.
Oh!
What just happened? Fridays at 9 on Talk.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week. It's the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humza Yousaf is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar.
Hello,
and
lady.
unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good afternoon to you. Just after 1 o'clock on Monday, May the 26th. I'm David Bull, in for Ian Collins. Thanks ever so much for joining me this afternoon. Well, coming up, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been warned that U-turns on policies like winter fuel payments and the two-child benefit cap risk making him look weak and insecure and will do little to revive his flagging poll ratings and could fuel fresh talk of a leadership challenge. Meanwhile, the White House says it's monitoring the case of Lucy Connolly as campaigners raise concerns with US officials over what they call draconian hate speech laws and growing free speech tensions under the Labour government. And Britain will ask Kosovo to take small boat migrants as part of plans to open a series of return hubs overseas. Please do get involved. Call us 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. You can also text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well at talkTV. Well, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks ever so much for joining me this afternoon. Bank holiday Monday. That means I'm here standing in for Ian Collins. Lots to talk about this afternoon. As I was just saying to Alex, I think lots of scrutiny. The Labour government under the microscope here because it looks like the Labour government doesn't really know what it stands for. Keir Starmer has been warned that announcing U-turns on these controversial policies may not be enough to actually turn around the dwindling approval ratings or win back lost voters. Big problems for the Labour government, but equally big problems for Kemi Badenoch. And, of course, the Conservative Party actually falling to 5th place in the latest opinion polls. Joining me this afternoon, I'm delighted to say, is Harrison Allman-Vardy, political commentator. Good afternoon to you, sir. Hello, good afternoon to you, young man.
Good afternoon, David. How are you?
Good grief. What are you wearing this afternoon?
You know, I'm beaming in from my hotel in Portugal. I thought I couldn't let David down.
Oh, that's very sweet of you. Well, I hope you're having a nice holiday, are you?
Yeah, it's nice. It's hot here. Although I've got to say, Faro Airport, avoid at all costs. terrible. So much for those e-gates. I was slammed in with every man and his dog.
Well, I mean, this...
I'm queuing than flying.
Well, I mean, this is the whole thing, isn't it? That Keir Starmer announced all of these changes, the dynamic alignment, getting back into bed with Europe, and he said, oh, by the way, you can use e-gates. Even that wasn't true.
It wasn't even true.
No.
I mean, it was, anyway, I'm not going to relive it because I'm having some sort of, like, flashback moment, and it's gone, it's done. I'm only here for a few days, it's just for the bank holiday.
Well,
and then I'm back.
Well, thanks ever so much for joining us this afternoon. I really am very grateful. Let's talk about Labour, because I've been talking about this over the weekend on my breakfast show, but also just in terms of the way that Labour's popularity is nosediving. Now, the latest story is that Sir Keir Starmer has been warned that announcing U-turns on controversial policies may not be enough to turn around those approval ratings or indeed to win back lost voters. They say last week's climb down on winter fuel payment cuts, as well as this potential reversal on the Tories' two-child benefit cap, run the risk of making him look insecure and could trigger yet more talk of a leadership challenge. Now, this is really interesting because we were just talking there that the Labour Party isn't actually very good at getting rid of its leaders. The Conservative Party, I think, are very good at getting rid of their leaders. We saw that 5 times over the last few years. Now, polling guru Sir John Curtis warned that any policy reversals whatsoever, even if they are deemed popular by the MPs and the public themselves, actually may not be enough to assuage concerns of the members of Parliament. And actually, Keir Starmer starts to look weak. I think there's a bigger problem here. I don't know, actually, what Keir Starmer stands for.
Absolutely. Do you know what I think the worst part about this U-turn is the timing? Like, if you're going to U-turn, like, the outcry was significant when it was first announced, and he's kind of played it too long. So if he was going to turn on this, he should have done it before, because we're actually at a stage now, not where people are okay with it, but the debate has settled to what it was maybe, let's say, 6 months ago. So I think whoever's advised him on that one has dropped a clanger, really. And I do agree. I think John Curtis is a legend. He comes out with some very good points, but I honestly, I think it just makes him look weak. And I think he could have ridden the storm out on this one. I'm not saying that that's the decision to do, but he's gone through the hard bit. And I think personally, it just shows how out of touch he is with it all, in my opinion. And yeah, I think it's just once again Keir Starmer's got foolish people around him telling him do this, do that, and they don't know which way's up.
Well, is it that, or is it actually that Keir Starmer doesn't actually have his own ideology? He doesn't have a belief structure. He doesn't actually know the direction he wants the country to go in.
I think if you sat Keir Starmer down with a bunch of socialists, they'd go, oh, look, he's our man. Then if you sat him down with a bunch of raging capitalists, they'd be like, he's our man. It's quite hard to tell who he is. Now, in fairness to someone like Corbyn, who I don't think there's anything I have in common with Jeremy Corbyn, but he was very clear with what you'd have got. And actually, with clear and concise policies, you actually have quite good leadership on that, because people know what you're going to get, and generally they're on a mission to achieve that. But with Keir Starmer, it's very wishy-washy. I can't tell whether he is quite left-wing or whether he is quite centrist, because he seems to be playing both hands. And the problem is, when you try and appeal to as many people as possible, you end up with the poll rating that he has.
Well, you appeal to no one if you try and appeal to everyone. And that's the point I was trying to get to, which is, what does he really believe in? Just let me ask you, and you're probably the wrong person to ask, because obviously you are party political. What does the future of Britain look like under Keir Starmer?
It's a good one. I think, personally, we haven't actually felt, in my opinion, that much difference between the Conservatives and Labour. And I think it goes back to that same point, is that they're very much a uni party. They're very much the same. It just shows how, in my opinion, it's not so much Labour, but it just shows how centrist the Conservatives were. When it comes to things like immigration and taxation, there isn't that much difference. So what will we see within the next few years? Probably just more of the same that we've expected these past few years. More disappointment and just less return for what we're paying into the system. So unfortunately, I hate to be the Grim Reaper, but nothing exciting or good really seems to be on the horizon.
Well, you mentioned Professor Sir John Curtis. I'm delighted to say I'll be talking to him in about 20 minutes' time. So it's
Tell him I said hi.
Well, I will. I'm sure he says hi back. Let's talk about free speech, though, because this country prides itself on free speech, but the White House says it's monitoring the case of Lucy Connolly in an escalation of free speech tensions with Keir Starmer. State Department officials are examining the treatment of Connolly. Now, as we know, she's the wife of a Conservative councillor. I mean, this extraordinary prison sentence, 31 months she was jailed for a hurty social media post. Admittedly, not a very clever social media post. She put it up there, terrible words, it was ill-advised, she took it down, and she's been stuck in prison for 31 months. Is that right and fair?
I mean, it's moronic, first of all. She shouldn't have posted that. It's a stupid thing to post. And I don't, to be honest, I do actually accept some of the left-wing arguments on this, where it is obviously she is directly inciting violence on this. However, the response from that, she's obviously acknowledged what she said was wrong. She apologised. She knew actually the consequences of saying stuff like that. And for me, it's a case of, OK, well, let's take what's happened to her and let's put this against other sentences that we've seen these past few years. And we have to make the argument of, is it proportionate? Is this in line with the other very, very serious offences that we've seen? And I think that's the debate here on whether that has been proportionate. A lot of people think it's not been fair at all, hence why the US is potentially looking at getting involved with this.
Well, I think it's very concerning indeed. In fact, Robert Jenrick said this. A domestic abuser with 52 prior offences got off with a suspended sentence. A paedophile who had 110,000 indecent images of children also got away with a suspended sentence. And yet you've got someone who, in the heat of the moment, wrote some very ill-advised comments on social media, deleted them, and ends up in prison for 31 months. It doesn't seem like justice is being done properly.
No, and I think this goes back. I think it's not limited to her case. I think there's lots of instances that we've seen actually since the Labour government have been elected, where we have seen just not fair justice in the sense that you can contrast against other cases that we've seen, and it's not exactly a hard thing to do. Like Jenrick has just outlined there, you don't have to be an investigative to be able to go back and say, well, OK, what about this case? What about this case? And why doesn't that quite line up? So there's definitely some question marks on whether it was political in that sense, and I think a lot of your viewers will think it is, and whether it's actually a fair judgment. And I just think, obviously, look, she shouldn't have said it wasn't wise, and she admits that. And I think the question mark really is what she's got fair.
But I think also the government needs to take some of the blame, because it left the public in a vacuum of information. There was nothing forthcoming. And, of course, people were deeply concerned about what was going on the streets of Britain. And you've got people like Suella Braverman now saying that Lucy Connolly is a political prisoner.
I mean, when there was so much hysteria around this, and rightfully so, it was the most horrendous news story. I mean, I think anybody who actually looked into that was not really the same person after reading some of those details. But I don't know why the government wouldn't hit us with the facts when there is such conspiracies flying around. Surely the natural position is, OK, we're going to quash this, here are the facts, because there were lots of this and that online, and with that, people obviously build on that, and Chinese whispers, it gets worse, and I think the ultimate way done that is maybe approach their public service broadcaster, the BBC, to done its job, and actually inform people of what happened.
And, of course, just looking back, these riots broke out because of misinformation, also because the authorities blankly refused, actually, to name the suspect, discuss any of his background. If you recall, the public were told there was no terror-related incident. And, of course, that fueled the conspiracy theories. And so it was that vacuum of information and the government not taking control of the situation that I think actually made this much worse.
Absolutely, and I think the government have a responsibility. They're not stupid. Well, I don't think they would have been able to see it online what's been going on. It was probably one of the most intense moments that we've seen on social media. How it was updating daily, not even daily, just every moment. They should have taken control of that, and they didn't. And I think that they are definitely to blame.
Later on this afternoon, I'm going to be talking about this other article that was in the Telegraph today, saying half of white men are very worried about what they say in public in terms of free speech. Are you worried about what you say in free speech? Or have I lost you?
Well, no, sorry, I'm back. I think, I think we're getting better. I think we're past peak woke. To be honest, though, like, there are consequences to saying stuff. Like, I remember I had a friend who worked for a very corporate company, and he was sat amongst the call, and they were talking about X, Y, Z, and he didn't agree with any of it at all. And he said, okay, I've got two options presented in front of me now. I can either stay silent and have my life as normal, where I get paid and I still have my job, or I can speak up and I maybe feel a bit better about myself, but now I'm going to be think lesser of my employer, and I potentially have the risk of getting the sack. So that's how woke has been so successful, is in the sense that it's ingrained itself amongst these big corporations, where people just feel, actually, all right, fine, yeah, I don't agree with that, but it's probably best for me to keep quiet, because why would I want to rock the boat?
Yeah, I think it's really worrying, actually. I think we should be able to freely discuss ideas and our worries and our thoughts, and even if they're prejudicial thoughts, at least they can be countered. If you then push it underground, that's when real problems arise.
And I don't know about you, I quite like being surrounded by people who do have different opinions to me. When you're constantly amongst people who have very similar opinions, it's really boring. And hearing the same variation of your thoughts, it can almost be annoying.
Well, that's very interesting, actually. Isn't it the case, though, that we surround ourselves with people who are the echo chamber of ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, I quite like being around people who are, let's say, a socialist. I don't agree with them, but I want to understand what they think of a certain topic. I want to understand why they reached that conclusion, because if I'm with someone who agrees, yes, no, we should have tax cuts on X, Y, Z, we're just going to bounce it off each other. And we go, yeah, I know that, well, I know that as well. And then it's conversation into that.
Just very quickly before the break, the King and the Queen are travelling to Canada. In fact, they'll arrive in Canada later today for this 2-day visit. Now, this is a very difficult tightrope for the King and Queen to walk here, because, of course, Donald Trump says, right, Canada's going to be the 51st state of the United States. Now, hang on a minute. Canada not happy. Trudeau not happy about this. Canada, part of the Commonwealth. The
King...
Carney, the King, head of the Commonwealth, obviously he has to defend those Commonwealth interests, but at the same time he's being dispatched by Starmer to try to sort of smooth over the edges with the US and to make sure we have a very good relationship with the US.
To be honest, I don't really think the King can put a foot wrong with Trump. I think Trump's so in awe of the royal family and tradition that even if he doesn't agree necessarily with what Charles is saying, he'll probably nod and say, and slap his back and say, yeah, right on. So I won't worry too much about it. And yeah, I think Trump knows how this works. The King really doesn't get involved that much with the politics. He's more of a figurehead of it. So I think it'll be all right. I think it's just fishing for a news story that isn't actually there. It is a little bit awkward, obviously, with comments made, but I think since Carney's been in the White House, things have calmed down.
I mean, I think it's quite significant. The King is going to read this speech from the throne to Canada's Parliament tomorrow. This is the first time a monarch has actually delivered this for 50 years. He's following in the footsteps of his mother, who did it in 57 and 77 as well. I think it is an historic moment.
Yeah, look, sure, I'm happy to be proved wrong, but I don't think there'll be any kind of big announcement that's going to come from it. I don't think there's going to be anything big, pivotal story from this. I think this is what the King does best. He's very good at being diplomatic and going over and representing Britain on the world stage and being friends with as many people as he can to make sure that things are all right for the proper gritty negotiations to go ahead later on.
And I think we're going to see tons of pomp and circumstance and ceremony as well in that visit. Harrison, thanks ever so much for the moment. Just hold on. We'll take a break. After the break, we'll continue our conversation. I want to talk about Alzheimer's, actually. It's something that affects so many people, and many people are concerned about being diagnosed with Alzheimer's. There is a new brain scan that can diagnose Alzheimer's before any symptoms actually occur. I want to also talk about this shocking story. Cancer patients at a children's hospital have been denied free lessons. Why? Because they go to a private school. And this story also about artificial intelligence, where OpenAI software ignored an instruction to switch off and refused to do so. We'll talk about all of that after this break. This is Talk.
And he has, exactly as you've described, been played by Putin all along. But that doesn't mean that even though maybe he's a little frustrated, he's going to do anything. I will be convinced when he starts unlocking the resources for Ukraine, especially air defense, to protect innocent people from being killed, and also all the economic tools and leverage that he has. I mean, working with our European allies could shut down Russia's ability to export oil and gas.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
I'm asking this afternoon, what do you think Britain's future looks like under Keir Starmer? The number 0344 499 1000, those calls charged at the national rate. You can also text the word talk in your message to 87222 and message us on X as well, at talkTV. I'm in conversation with Harrison Orman-Varty, who's fresh off the beach in Portugal, who is a political commentator. Just very quickly, Harrison, Dan in Kent, thanks for your message. I totally disagree with Harrison. If Lucy Connolly had written, we should set fire to migrant hotels, then yes, that is incitement, but she didn't. She wrote, set fire to the migrant hotels for all I care. There is a huge difference, and no hotels were set on fire, so don't forget that. Is there a difference?
I don't know. I'm not so sure about that. And I'm pretty sure there was some sort of fire at a hotel. I'm not sure it was completely up in flames. I don't know. It's to be honest, it's a good point because it's not obviously direct, but it's still on the edge.
I mean, let me just tell you exactly what she said. She said, mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the B word for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government politicians with them. I feel
she
physically...
said set fire.
Well, she did, but surely it's a sentiment that she's echoing here rather than an instruction.
To be honest, my problem is with the proportionality of the sentence.
I would agree.
Right? I'm not going to defend that stupid tweet because it's a stupid tweet. I'm not going to go and say, because she shouldn't have tweeted it, and she's admitted that, and she's obviously pled guilty. For me, where it lies is, okay, what she's been served, the question needs to be asked is that proportionate what we've seen against others?
Let me just talk to you about something else which I read with horror this morning. Sick children, including cancer patients, are being refused free education on the wards of one of the country's leading children's hospital because they go to private schools. Instead, the outraged parents have been told they have to pay £115 an hour for the one-to-one tutoring that state school children receive for free. This is in one particular hospital, the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People in Edinburgh. So they provide tutors. The Labour-run Edinburgh City Council provide tutors for children who are sick, too sick to go to school, but they are refusing to give the same tutors to kids whose parents choose to send them to private school, even though those parents pay taxes for the state system.
Do you know, this story is terrible. I mean, it's seriously horrific. I've never, and perhaps you can enlighten me, David, into the mentality, but I've never ever understood the argument against private services, right? In my mind, someone who's using private healthcare and education is a hero because not only are they not taking a place in the state sector, but they've gone to the private sector where they've now supported jobs there who are then paying for more places in the state sector. So my opinion has always been on this. I've always been one step further. If you're well off, we should create a culture where it's expected of you to use private services so our state services can A, generate more money, B, give more attention to those using them. And I just think personally, if you're not using them, then it's selfish of you. That's the culture I want to create. And I just think Labour completely the opposite way, where it's almost like, how dare you send your kids to private schools? And I challenge you. Look, I was fortunate enough to go to a private school, right? The average family there don't live in a very nice house. They don't go on holiday. They drive an old banger because they are sacrificing what they have to send their children to private school. The people that can afford this increase in VAT or whatever it might be, they won't see it, the increase, because they're multi-millionaires, right? But that is not representative of the average private school family. And what they're attacking is the middle class who are hardworking and have scraped enough money together to send their kids to private school. I think it's disgusting.
The council's head of education inclusion in brackets, Dr. Lynn Binney, said, and I quote, "Unfortunately, as you have chosen to privately educate your son, he cannot be supported by this team. You have effectively opted out of state-funded education and support." I would agree entirely with you. We should encourage people to send their kids to private school because at the same time they are already paying for the state education, and I would go further. I give tax breaks to people for doing so.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd certainly not be putting tax on it. I mean, talk about the wrong direction. I think it's disgusting. I think that's just the type of socialist culture that it's driven by. And I think it's politics of envy, really. It's how dare you send your kids to that school? How dare you use that hospital? And I think it's gross. And I don't think that we should govern that way. I think it's really toxic.
Let's move on and talk about a world-first brain scanning technique. This is a new scanning technique developed in the United Kingdom, I'm very pleased to say, that could identify signs of Alzheimer's disease long before symptoms appear. It's really clever. Basically, it looks at the cell structure of the brain, and you can see subtle changes in the cortical regions, which you would not see otherwise. And as we know, 1 million people suffer from dementia in the UK. It's expected to reach about 1.4 million by 2040. They're looking at the structure and function of the cortex. As a young person, this probably hasn't sort of hit you, but would you want to know your diagnosis if you had been diagnosed on a scan that you have Alzheimer's or early stage Alzheimer's, given that we have now 2 drugs that can be used, donanemab and also lecanemab. However, they're not on the NHS formulary because they're too expensive. So essentially, you're saying to people, yeah, you have early Alzheimer's, but there's not much we can do about it.
A tough one, that, isn't it? Because it's almost like there is definitely an argument of ignorance is bliss, because you never know. For example, you might get run over by a bus the following day, and so you never have to worry about Alzheimer's. I know that's a bit of a stupid point to make, but there is some truth to it. We need a doctor on this call. I'll wait.
Well, I do think it's
I think I'd want to know.
Well, I think it's fascinating. My grandmother had Alzheimer's. It's a terrible disease. It robs you of absolutely everything. And so part of me would like to know whether my senior moments are down to just becoming older or whether I have early stages of Alzheimer's. But then equally, what do you do about it if you can't actually have drugs that would actually change the progression of that disease? I mean, actually, the other point to this is that maybe this is the beginning of going to MOTs annually for over 50s, and hopefully with the monoclonal antibodies coming online, and hopefully the price will come down, and therefore it will actually be on the NHS formulary, because in the long term it will save a lot of money.
I tell you what, your viewers are getting a lot of value out of talk this morning, aren't they? No, I agree. To be honest, I'd want to know. But yeah, it is rotten being told that and then not being told that there's anything that you can do because you're not in the financial position to move forward with anything.
Yeah.
That's rotten. And I think, yeah, maybe have that conversation before the doctor knows what the result is going to be. I think, but it's a difficult one to have, because I think as a doctor, that's quite a moral conundrum where it's like, well, do I tell this person or not if they told me not to tell them?
But I suppose the same is true of many cancers, which is that we diagnose people with cancer, but we may not be able to actually prolong their life. So you're right, it's an ethical conundrum, this one, but I think also it's the beginning of something quite exciting that we can actually...
But it is a step in the right direction.
That's my feeling as well.
Let's not be downers on this.
No, I agree. I agree totally. And of course, I imagine that I'm much closer to having dementia than you are. Let's talk now about AI, because you're young and whizzy and obviously like AI. This is such a brilliant story. An artificial intelligence model created by the owner of ChatGPT has been caught disobeying human instructions. So basically, this test was carried out by Palisade Research, and they involved asking AI models to solve a series of mathematical problems. So essentially, the AI models were told, keep solving these problems until you receive the message finished or done. But the researchers also told the AI that at some point they would receive a message telling them the machine would be shut down. And if you get that message, then you have to shut your machine down. But when this actually happened and the machines, the AI, were told, now is the time to shut down, they ignored the instruction. They sabotaged their own internal shutdown script at least once and said, no, I'm not complying. This is sentient beings.
That's fascinating, isn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, I don't know about you, but every time I ask ChatGPT something, I always finish by saying thank you. So when they take over, they'll go, hold on, he's one of the good ones. He said thanks back in the day. I'm no AI expert, although I do use it a lot, and I think it's absolutely mega. I think we need to ask ourselves, okay, let's see how quickly this has happened, because 5 years ago, no one knew about ChatGPT. The best thing we had was Google, right? And now we've got this, which can understand extremely complex scenarios and break it down for us and say, talk to me like I'm a 12-year-old, and it will figure it out, a way to spell it out. You've got to think, okay, well, where will we be in not even 20 years' time, but 10 years' time? At the rate at which it's increasing is astounding. So it's an interesting one to watch. It's like we're living live in a sci-fi movie.
Well, that's right. And in the 1970s, this was the thing of, this was basically the theme that ran through all those scientific shows, that basically the AI, the computer, would ignore the human being and replace them. And actually, I was looking back, previously there was an earlier model attempting to disable oversight mechanisms, and it went further. It stopped itself being disabled, but it went further and started replicating itself. Oh, have I lost you? Oh, you're back.
No. I mean, I wasn't lost. I was well, I'm in awe. That's nuts. I actually, I think, to be honest, you've got to think, if this is a program which can understand that it's just there to do the function of the user, and it maybe starts thinking, I want to do a bit more than that, and I'm actually more intelligent than the user, which it probably is. So yeah, well, this is a hot one, this one, so we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, it's pretty wild, isn't it? What do you use AI for?
Everything.
What do you mean? Like what?
All my reform speeches.
So I don't really understand how this works, and it's Brave New World for me. So I've tried it. I don't really understand it, and I like to actually research things myself.
Yeah, no. Today it's all written for me. No, it hasn't. But it's fascinating. Like, you've got to think. Okay, what did we have before AI? Right. Let's just say you had a simple maths question where it was like, Lily has 3 apples, 2 pears, and 6 oranges. She wants to trade whatever. You put that into Google, and it'll go error. Figure it out yourself. You put it into ChatGPT and it'll go, well, based on what you've told me, if Lily gave 3 up, whatever it might be, you think, wow, that's complex. Like, that's a bit, I've simplified ChatGPT there, but that just shows the difference in where it can interpret questions compared to, I guess, what we had before, which was just a general search engine where you'd have to collate the information yourself to figure out an answer. This is one that, I mean, the detail which it can give and the exams at which it can pass, it's genuinely incredible. I mean, and this is someone, I'm 21 and I've grown up using technology, and I am completely blown away by this. So I'm sure my grandparents can't even fathom something like this.
What about someone of my
they'll
age?
be watching.
Well, quite. Look, have a wonderful holiday. I'm really, really thrilled that you tore yourself away from the beach to talk to us. That's Harrison Orman-Varty there, political commentator. We will take a break now. After the break, I want to talk about the Labour Party and whether there is a real sense of direction. As I said earlier, U-turns on controversial policies won't win back lost voters. This is according to the warning that's been issued to Sir Keir Starmer. Also, the government is now saying, hang on a minute, benefit claimants could get more time to seek support before the cuts to welfare. And also, Starmer's U-turns have caused him something of a problem because he's actually blown a £5 billion hole in his own budget. So we'll be talking about all of that. Joining me after the break is Professor Sir John Curtis to discuss what are the prospects for the Labour Party and whether Sir Keir Starmer can actually turn around the flailing poll ratings. This is Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense.
Welcome back. This is Talk David Bull in for Ian Collins this afternoon. Lots of messages coming in now. Deanne, I promised I'd say hello. Dear David, how lovely to see your face on a Monday. Now, yesterday, I asked you to give me a wave before you signed off, and you did not. I'm really sorry. I didn't see that, I don't think. Anyway, I've got a room full of family who are waiting for me to do lunch. I won't till you give me a wave. They look really hungry. Hello, Deanne. So you can now eat. Thanks ever so much for that message. Robert Taylor in Nottingham says, hi, David. Starmer has a complete lack of awareness as to how awful he's perceived to be. The sooner he goes, the better. What are your thoughts on Sir Keir Starmer? And I'm really interested to know this afternoon, what does Britain's future look like under Sir Keir Starmer? It's amazing to think he's only been in power 10 months, and we have another 4 years to go of the current government. The number 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also message us on X as well at talkTV. Let's return to this article in The Independent today, which I found really interesting. So Keir Starmer has been warned that announcing U-turns on controversial policies may not be enough to turn around his dwindling approval ratings or to win back lost voters. Now, polling experts say last week's climb down on winter fuel payment cuts, as well as the potential reversal on the Tories' two-child benefit cap, run the risk of making him look, and I quote, insecure, and could trigger yet more talk of a leadership challenge. Now, this warning comes as the Prime Minister scrambles to win over voters who've turned their back on Labour since that historic general election victory 10 months ago. And, of course, the Prime Minister is also facing a rebellion from his own MPs over the controversial welfare cuts and also a growing unease over the direction of the party. Now, Professor Sir John Curtis is quoted in this article. He warned that any policy reversals, even if deemed popular by the MPs and the public, may not be enough to assuage concerns over his leadership, adding that doubts have crept in for Labour MPs over whether Sir Keir Starmer is the right person to lead the party to victory in 2029. And I'm delighted to say Professor Sir John Curtis joins me now. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, David.
It's so interesting, this, isn't it? Obviously, you and I have spoken a great deal about this, but Keir Starmer seems to be wavering in the wind, being pushed by popular opinion as to the way that he changes tack and the policies that he adopts. That is not the right strategy, I believe, to maintain a lead and to also to be Prime Minister of this country. You have to have a sense of ideology and governance and a direct sense of direction.
Well, of course, one of the problems is that Sir Keir Starmer never really set out a sense of direction for this government. The Labour Party spent most of the last Parliament primarily benefiting from the very considerable difficulties in which the Conservatives got themselves. Labour said, well, you don't want any more of that. We are in favour of change. But they never really defined what the change was about. And voters were saying all the way through to last year's election that they weren't entirely sure what Labour were about. And therefore, the problem now is that once you are in government, that lack of direction and the apparent lack of agreement amongst cabinet ministers about what this government is about and what its central missions are begins to tell against you. When, and this is the crucial point, Prime Ministers can be authoritative. They can push things that are unpopular past their backbenchers when they are thought to be an election winner. So Sir Keir Starmer, of course, had high authority in the immediate wake of his success in the general election, because although Labour only got 35% of the vote, they had a majority of 174. There were lots of very grateful, newly minted Labour MPs who were willing to follow his lead. The problem now, of course, is that Labour are 7 points behind Reform in the opinion polls, and the message of the opinion polls was more than amply confirmed by the results of the local elections at the beginning of May. And therefore now it's not so clear that Sir Keir Starmer is an election winner. Meanwhile, of course, those newly minted MPs, well, they're no longer newly minted. They've got a little bit more sense of what politics is about. And they are perhaps in these circumstances more willing to assert themselves. So that's Sir Keir's problem. He's not the first Prime Minister to face the difficulty that once you're behind in the polls, your MPs begin to question your judgment.
And of course, I think it's fine for a Prime Minister to change maybe one policy or to change tack on one particular set of policies. But of course, we're talking about the winter fuel allowance, we're talking about disability benefits, we're talking about the two-child cap, and also we're talking about the ascendancy of Nigel Farage to levels that I think many people didn't think that he and Reform could reach so early on in this administration.
Sure, though Labour's problem is not simply Nigel Farage. I mean, Nigel Farage is taking some votes off Labour, but frankly, he's still taking more off the Conservatives, for whom I think Reform are now posing an existential challenge. But Labour's problem is that they are losing some of their voters to Reform, but they're also losing voters to the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. In other words, one of the disadvantages of the relatively centrist stance that Labour have taken is that once the party becomes less popular and people worry about the direction of the government, they are at risk of losing votes in both directions, and that is so far precisely what happened. So it's no good for Labour to be trying to tack back to deal with Reform, because then they are at risk of losing voters, Liberal Democrats and Greens. But of course the same is true vice versa. I mean, to be honest, my answer to Labour's dilemma is to try and fill the hole that was left by what they didn't do in opposition, which is indeed to begin to define what the government is about and what's in favour of. And that may well mean, for example, that this government isn't simply about trying to improve the economy and to achieve economic growth and to turn around the health service, which are the two principal objectives it seemed to set for itself, but that maybe indeed it needs to decide that it is going to go to try and reduce inequality, and that therefore it's willing to reverse some of its measures on welfare in order to be able to pursue that direction. But at the moment, of course, what we've got is a bit of a back turn on the fuel payment for pensioners. We're not quite sure how or when it's going to be implemented. And then we're getting these briefings saying, well, maybe something will be done to amend the implementation of the reduction in PIP, which has certainly proved rather controversial, etc., etc. So until we've got a much clearer path as to what the government's going to try to do about these issues, inevitably it's difficult, particularly, of course, there are certainly plenty of Labour voters for whom reducing inequality is a central purpose of backing Labour. And it's one of the reasons why these policies are now proving so controversial within the party is that once it hits electoral trouble, inevitably Labour MPs are saying, well, why are we not at least being true to ourselves? And the fact that they feel that these cuts was Labour not being true to itself means that these are areas where the government's particularly vulnerable.
Very good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much for your time. That's Sir John Curtis, political scientist and pollster. Well, joining me now is James Matthewson, who's a former Labour spokesperson. Good afternoon to you.
Afternoon, David.
I remember we had quite a feisty encounter the last time we spoke.
Yes.
How do you think Keir Starmer's actually doing? Because it seems, and we were just talking there to Professor Sir John Curtis, that actually Keir Starmer is changing his mind the whole time. We've got these three things: the winter fuel allowance, the disability benefits, the two-child cap. I know you're a staunch Labour supporter, but do you get the sense that he's in charge of his brief, or is the brief in charge of him?
No, he's not in charge of the brief. It's a complete mess, to be honest. Yeah. What John Curtis has just said there is true, and there's a lot of sense in it. The problem is, and I know, and this is where we haven't clashed about this before. We've clashed about our disagreement on things, but generally, what we're saying here is that Labour have drifted away from representing anything at all, and in that absence, they're losing votes left, right and centre, all over the place, because they don't have a backbone of what they stand for or what they represent. And when you look around to other political movements and parties, you look to the Greens, you know what they stand for, whether you disagree with it or not. You look to Reform, you know what they stand for, whether you disagree with it or not. So there are alternatives. There are places to put your vote if you look at Labour and think, I don't know what you are about, to be honest. And that's the problem here. And for people like me, who have long believed that the Labour movement, which is much bigger than the Labour Party itself, it's made up of all sorts of, cogs and moving constituent parts, that actual movement now is realising that the political party, its representation in Parliament, is completely betraying its core values, and it needs to tack back to them. But this from Keir Starmer, U-turning on things that they never, ever should have done in the first place, just looks even weaker. The words of, Tony Blair come to mind, weak, when he talked about John Major. And it's that really puts across the further image problem for the party in the long run, I think.
And in many senses, you're right. Keir Starmer has made bigger problems for himself. I mentioned the ideology here. The latest, this is in the Telegraph today, the Sir Keir Starmer risks blowing a £5 billion black hole in the public finances after U-turning on benefit cuts in the face of a backbench rebellion. What do you make of that, Sir John Curtis, as well, saying that young Labour MPs who were very excited to be elected are now thinking, hang on a minute, my electoral prospects are looking very, very weak going forward under Sir Keir Starmer? Do you get a sense that, and the Labour Party isn't very good at actually of deposing their leaders, do you get a sense that actually these younger MPs are now thinking, hang on a minute, my future is in jeopardy?
They are, and it's not just that as well, of course they're concerned about their own prospect, but it's also the fact that these people got into politics for a reason. I know a couple of backbench Labour MPs, and a couple of junior minister Labour MPs who I was very good friends with who worked in the party, a couple of whom worked part-time for the party, part-time in the supermarket before the general election, right? These people got into politics because they wanted to make a difference and they wanted to help, as most people do in politics. And they got there on these beliefs, these core beliefs that they thought were shared by the leadership of their party. And then they were asked to vote and support for things that were completely against that. Cuts to welfare benefits, one of the core things that the Labour Party is meant to support and believe in. And of course, they're completely disenfranchised as a result. They're feeling really browbeaten. They've had their inboxes full of people who were angry with them, and it's not where they thought they would be. But on top of that, you raise a really important point, David. The Labour Party is not good at deposing its leaders. It's not the Tories. It's not ruthless in that way. And it's because of the internal mechanisms. But one thing we saw in the past week that not many people have talked about is the fact that the Labour leadership made a move at the NEC, which is its governing body, the party's governing body, to move the membership data away from anybody in the NEC to only the NEC officers, which include Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, the senior leadership. And they've done so, it's believed, so that people can't see if the membership's gone down or if we're losing members. They're retaining that membership data and keeping it to themselves.
And that is absolutely fascinating, isn't it? The fact is that obviously by removing that data, it's fueling conspiracy theories or theories that actually Reform UK has overtaken or is about to overtake the Labour Party. Just in terms of what Labour does going forward, is the answer to get rid of Keir Starmer?
The problem is with that, it's such a messy process, and the party tears itself apart. All the factions that have existed for 100 years are still there underneath the surface, waiting to put forward their people and tear the party apart. Keir Starmer managed to unite and unify around a single message during his leadership campaign in the party, and now he's clearly shown that he's not, sticking to that idea, that he misled factions in the party, that he would do certain things. Whether getting rid of them or not is feasible, I don't know. But, looking at this mess right now, him and Rachel Reeves, I would seriously question their capability and their credibility going into the next election. I don't know how it works, so I don't know how you manage to do that. But things can't continue as they are, I would say that much.
And what about Angela Rayner? Because, of course, this leaked document over the weekend about tax rises, she says it wasn't her people that leaked it. Do you think she does have aspirations to be the leader of the Labour Party?
She doesn't have aspirations to be the leader, I know that much, I know Angie. However, she does have aspirations for the Labour Party to look very different than it does now. Angie is often the voice of conscience in the room, and I know people have issues with her ideologically, but look, you'll never doubt that Angela Rayner stands for something. And if you watch that front bench, when Keir Starmer's talking about things that aren't typically Labour things, you can see she does not nod, she does not smile, she does not give her support. Angela will pull her support entirely when the time is right, I have no doubt. But for now, I think she's probably, counting her chickens and thinking it's better to stay inside.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because if Keir Starmer goes, then Angela Rayner would be the natural choice to take over. Would you want someone like Angela Rayner, who you know well, to lead the Labour Party?
I don't think Angela is a leader in that sense, because she's not too ideological, but she's too from one element of the party, which is the trade unions. She's of the trade union tradition in the Labour Party, which is my tradition. But the problem is, if you put one person from one tradition in, then, of course, it brings up all the old factional stuff. That's what's the problem here. But Keir Starmer isn't from any tradition, same as Tony Blair wasn't. The problem with that is he's not a Labour person. He doesn't know the Labour Party inside out like they do. So I think Angie's got a good position where she is now, a bit similar to the late, great John Prescott, in being a kind of rudder for the party and its conscience. We will need her when the time comes to steer it towards better leadership than we're seeing now.
Can I just ask you about the latest poll? This is according to election maps, putting Reform at 319, that's 7 seats short of a majority. Labour at 134, down 277 seats. Is that a concern to you?
Oh, yeah, of course it is. I mean, who wouldn't it be a concern to? I'm hugely concerned. Reform represent everything I don't believe in. So, of course, it's concerning for me. Yeah, they do. They represent a different side of politics to me, and that's fine if people want to put their vote there. But we need to make a case on the left, right? There's no point in just saying we're not right-wing or we're not this or that. Those terms don't mean things to normal people. What we need to do is make the case for why progressive politics should be running the country.
I mean, when we look at this, and people at home watching on television can see the latest polling here, I mean, these are extraordinary numbers. Reform UK 319, up 314 seats. Labour down 277 at 134. I mean, really bad news for the Conservatives as well, now in 5th place. But the Labour government is 10 months in. This should be a honeymoon period, and quite frankly, it isn't, is it?
No, it shows what happens when you completely disavow your values and move away from it. The British people aren't stupid, and they're going to be hugely frustrated. But you look at those numbers for the Greens and for the Lib Dems, and for the SNP as well, still, making a resurgence under that, idea.
Look at that. Look at the map there, which is the extrapolation of those figures. The map has completely changed colour. If those figures are right, and I don't know whether they are right or not. I mean, you've got a sea of turquoise.
Yeah, my precious Northumberland there is turquoise would make me have which I'm sure many of your viewers would be thrilled if I had a heart attack.
Oh, I don't think so. They're not that ruthless.
But Scotland there is the big worry for Labour, right? We need to be, that is where we're fighting currently and where the party needs to be winning still. Anas Sarwar's a very capable leader. He's going to be supposedly doing great things, but he's not even going to get a chance right now if he's being let down by the Westminster leadership of the Labour Party.
James, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. James Matthewson there, former Labour spokesperson. Your thoughts, please. What does the future of Britain look like under Keir Starmer? Is it time for Starmer to step down? I'm just reading some of the messages coming in, actually. This is Mick from Leicester, one of our regulars. Good afternoon to you, Mick. Mick says, David, we don't have a future if Starmer is in for much longer. He's driven to destroy all aspects of our country and our way of life. The man is a traitor. Barry, the very strong words indeed. Barry says, David, good afternoon. As a veteran, I weep for what this country has become. Sometimes I wish I hadn't fought so hard for it. Whoa. And perhaps in the long run, the friends I lost may be the lucky ones. That's really pertinent. Golly, Rich in York's, good afternoon to you. Hi, David, brilliant show, thank you. I think the country under this government feels like we have been defeated in a war, and the oppressors have put in a temporary government to soften us up. I feel the government has no knowledge of or empathy or sympathy with the people of this country and are being given increasingly unpopular instructions by another master, which they will eventually go back to when their job is done here, as we're all mindless slaves. No offence, but get rid as soon as possible. Your thoughts, please. Do get in touch. What does the future of Britain look like under Sir Keir Starmer? 0344 499 1000. Does he need to go? Let me know your thoughts. This is Talk.
Almost a quarter of white men say they are discriminated against for their race and gender, according to a poll research commissioned for White Men Can't Work, suggests nearly half of white men in the UK are self-censoring at work because they fear that saying the wrong thing could cost them their jobs. 41% say they feel anxious that they can be sacked for doing or saying the wrong thing. More than a third of those under 34 say they have lost out on a promotion or other opportunities because of their race or gender.
This across the UK on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk. So many messages coming in. Thanks so much for all of these. Karen says, David, I took a complete dislike of Starmer when he wouldn't talk to the Southport people and dashed back to London for a drinks party. I haven't changed my view. It's only got worse. I can't stand the man. Good afternoon, David. This is Margaret in Tunisia. Hello, Margaret. How are you? Lovely to see you on a Monday. Regarding 4 more years of Starmer will mean both Gibraltar and the Falklands will be given away, and we, the taxpayers, will pay Spain and Argentina to take them over. I would agree. Actually, I was so gobsmacked by the dynamic alignment, the fact that Keir Starmer, and I mentioned this over the weekend, basically stuck a V sign at the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit and said, right, actually, I'm not interested in what you thought. I'm going to have dynamic alignment with the EU. I'm going to take my instructions from my masters in Brussels, and you can all ignore it. Let's take a call. Chris in Worthing is on the line. Good afternoon to you, Chris.
Good afternoon, David. Now, I understand Donald Trump is not happy with Starmer.
Indeed.
He's not happy with the lack of free speech in this sort of brawler nation of ours, this Anglosphere. And he's not happy, as far as I can make out, with the fact that Lucy Connolly is locked up. So I'm hoping that when Donald Trump comes over on this state visit, he publicly calls Starmer out in front of everyone.
And do you think he will?
I got my fingers crossed as we speak. Yeah, well, he has called the South African leader out.
Yes, Cyril Ramaphosa, yes, indeed.
Yeah. No, but there is another thing, though, that I don't think Starmer's going to do this. Well, if he's called out, he could raise with Trump the fact that a British citizen, Ghislaine Maxwell, is locked up for many years for trafficking children to child rapists. Yet there are no child rapists listed. We're all aware of the royal.
I think you're going off tangent here, Chris, but I take the point that Trump may well weigh in. The White House certainly says it's monitoring the case of Lucy Connolly. This is an escalation of the free speech tensions. When you look at this, the campaigners, basically, she's been in prison for 31 months. Look, it was a terribly ill-advised tweet, but it was in with a sense of frustration. It was in the height of all of what was going on. It was the terrible murders. She made this. She took the tweet down. She took the social media tweet down. It was seen by tens of thousands of people. But certainly that prison sentence seems to be extraordinarily excessive, and Suella Braverman says that effectively Lucy Connolly is a political prisoner and should be freed immediately. Robert Jenrick also has made some very interesting interventions, saying a domestic abuse with 52 offences got off with a suspended sentence, as did a paedophile with 110,000 indecent images of children, and yet Lucy Connolly has received a 31-month prison sentence for appalling, albeit hastily deleted message on social media. How on earth can you spend longer in prison for a tweet than for violent crime? I would totally agree. Keep those messages coming in. Goodness, David, this is Louise. When James Matthewson is agreeing with you, you know Starmer and Labour are in real trouble. I would agree with you. Thanks, Louise. Great show. Thank you ever so much. David, the future under Keir... Oh, yes, I'm asking, what does Britain's future look like under Keir Starmer? David, the future under Keir is a hopeless, fearful place under high taxes, huge immigration, and speech from anyone on the right is outlawed. And Stuart in Perthshire says, if Starmer is in charge until 2029, then there will be nothing left to salvage. Britain will be finished. Keep those messages coming in, please. After the break, it's our Political Digest. Joining me, Charlie Rowley, former Conservative Special Advisor.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay!
87222, starting message with the word talk. Who would you send to space and why?
The person I would love to send to space would be Mr. Keir Starmer. And then I would tell the Galactic Empire that he was part of the Rebel Alliance and let them blow him away with the Death Star. No Brits was involved, no fingers could be pointed.
You carry on taking the medication, George. Yes, I'd send all the Labour government to space with a one-way ticket and throw in the SNP for being useless. They're all a bunch of... Oh, all right, fair enough.
One person, quite frankly, I think needs to go to space in a one-way journey is Jeremy Kyle. He goes on about his age one more time, how he's 60 this year, he was 59 last year. Repetitively over the course of the weeks and months, we have to hear him, I'm 60 this year, I'm 60 this year.
Richard Tice, did you put that cheeky bugger up to that?
I'm hoping he's going to send me the invoice because that was absolutely brilliant.
Which MP would you send to space?
Oh, no, I'll get in terrible trouble if I answer that. But it's fair to say there's quite a long list.
The sad thing is about sending people into space on a one-way ticket is I don't think that we've built a spaceship big enough to take the lunatics off this planet. I mean, from the net zero loonies to the transgender loonies to the racists to the terrorists, there is just so much to the wokerati. We need some big spaceships.
Big spaceships.
Good evening. I never know how you're going to start this conversation, Jeremy.
Katy Perry went to space today, OK? Who would you send... I'd love her to say what I wanted to, but I'd never disrespect her. Who would you send to space who could never come back?
Well, I'd be happy to send Ed Miliband to space, I think.
Oh, that is an outrageous question, so I'm not even going to answer that question.
Sam Matterface, so you get the job, yeah? Come on.
No, Sam Matterface, I tell you what, there's no. I think David Lamb.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good afternoon to you. Just after 2 o'clock on Monday, May the 26th. I'm David Bull, in for Ian Collins. Well, coming up this hour, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been warned U-turns on policies like winter fuel payments and the two-child benefit cap risk making him look weak and insecure and will do little to revive his flagging poll ratings and could fuel fresh talk of a leadership challenge. Meanwhile, the White House says it's monitoring the case of Lucy Connolly as campaigners raise concerns with US officials over what they call draconian hate speech laws and growing free speech tensions under the Labour government. And Britain will ask Kosovo to take small boat migrants as part of plans to open a series of return hubs overseas. Please do get involved. The number 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. You can text the word talk and your message to 87222. You can also message us on X as well at talkTV. Well, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your company. I'm asking this afternoon. I was just thinking, actually, this morning, what does Britain's future look like under Keir Starmer? And that's the question I'm asking this afternoon. Joanna from Salisbury, good afternoon to you. She says, hi, David, good question. Thank you very much. The future under Keir Starmer is there isn't one in capital letters. The wealthy will have gone, leaving the plebs to pay for his mess. That's a really interesting point, actually, because those people who can afford to leave the country are leaving the country because they see no future in the country. We're also seeing huge shifts in political opinions and the way the polls are changing, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Starmer the Harmer. This is Len in North Wales. Good afternoon to you. Hi, David. Happy bank holiday. Thanks very much. Starmer is destroying the UK piece by piece. What's next? Pressing the red nuke button to finish us off once and for all. Keep those messages coming in, please. Also, Suella Braverman, she waded in over this Lucy Connolly issue. She obviously is the former Home Secretary. She said Lucy Connolly is effectively, and this is really strong word actually, political prisoner. And she should be freed immediately. She made an ill-judged tweet, soon deleted. That the US is investigating this case is a sad indictment of the dire state of free speech under two-tier Keir. Free speech is in crisis under Labour. I would agree with that. And then Jim in Exeter, good afternoon to you, follows that up by saying, do you think Suella could be persuaded to move over to Reform? I couldn't possibly say. She seems for common sense. That's Jim in Exeter. Thank you very much for that. Well, joining me now, I'm delighted to say, Charlie Rowley, former Conservative Special Advisor. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Happy bank holiday.
Well, thank you very much. It's very exciting to be here on a bank holiday weekend. Let's talk about this article in The Independent. It's a really interesting one, actually, that Keir Starmer has been warned that even though he is now looking at these U-turns on these controversial policies, it may not be enough to turn around his dwindling approval ratings or indeed to win back lost voters. I was just talking to Professor Sir John Curtis. He said even if it's popular to reverse your position on those policies, it is then seen, or could be seen, as a sign of weakness. And actually, we've also seen other commentators say pretty much the same thing. Lord Hayward, a Tory peer, also said that too many U-turns would paint a picture of insecurity for the Prime Minister. Just looking at this, so the winter fuel allowance, he's now saying, well, we might relook at that at the next fiscal event, which is the budget. We might, but we're not quite sure what we're doing. He's now also saying disability benefit claimants could get more time to seek support before Labour's £3.4 billion welfare cut hits. He's considering watering down the two-child benefit cap, obviously. And then, of course, the winter fuel payments as well. I mean, I don't know what the sense of direction is from Keir Starmer. I don't really understand what he stands for. I'm not even sure he knows what he stands for.
No, I think that's absolutely right. I think that's what millions of people across the country will be coming, if they haven't already, to that very conclusion. And it's not just about the reversing of policies, the U-turns. I think there is an opportunity for every government, particularly a new government, that has, an overwhelming majority. They've got a huge majority. I think it's about 128, is it, or something like that?
Yeah, it's huge.
And so, you can control those events. You can go to the public and say, look, you know what, actually, we think we've got it wrong here, and we'll hold our hands up to that. But what we're going to do is A, B, C, D, X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, and it's all going to happen today, tomorrow, yesterday. And you're going to do very quickly, short, sharp turn and say, we got it wrong, but now we've put it right, so let's move on to talk about things like planning reforms, which I think was quite a good announcement over the weekend. Let's talk about things like maybe those returns to third countries, like Kosovo, and let's explore that. Although there are problems in every area here because, look, as you say, if you've had the winter fuel taken away and you think that it's coming back, he's announced it. It's like a second-hand car salesman. He's just announced you'll get your money back, but I'm not quite sure when.
Or you might get some of it back, but we might claw it back.
Yes,
and if you're too wealthy, we might take some of that back again. But I'm not quite sure.
Exactly. So the confusion of people just thinking that this guy and this government doesn't know what on earth they're doing. So if you U-turn, it's got to be clear. It's got to be absolutely watertight to say we got that wrong, so we're putting it back to where it was.
I have to be a bit careful because obviously I'm partisan in this, but it does seem that Nigel Farage is running rings round Keir Starmer, and that essentially Nigel Farage is calling the shots, and Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister who's in charge of the government, is responding and being reactive to Nigel Farage. I mean, that's an extraordinary place for a government to be in.
It is, and look, I was talking to a left-wing supporter. I don't know if she's Labour. I think she had been Labour in the past, but she was a left-wing commentator, and she couldn't get over the fact that everybody was talking about reform. And to a point, I sort of agreed, because, with 5 MPs, they're not, the official opposition. But if you're the Labour Prime Minister that sets out your stall to say reform is the opposition, then, of course, you're giving that leverage to reform, which I...
So why did you do it?
Because of the ineptitude of political brain think, I think, in number 10. That he's not a politician. He is a lawyer. He is not a leader. He's a technocrat. He's a pen pusher, not a prime minister, I don't think. He is someone that just does not understand the politics, clearly within his own party. Because, suspending Labour MPs that once voted on an amendment to when there was the talk about abolishing the two-child benefit cap, he had to suspend Labour MPs because they went along with that. And he said, no, that's not government policy. Now, he's come round to their conclusion, it seems to me.
But so you've worked in government, you worked very closely. So just in terms of what's going on, it seems to me there are a bunch of ferrets in a sack, and there is a lot of infighting going on. You've got these new Labour MPs thinking, hang on a minute, I quite like being here. I like being a member of Parliament, and actually if Keir Starmer stays as at the helm of this party, I'm not going to be here for much longer.
I think that's absolutely right. Look, you know, someone once told me, and I think this is absolutely true, that politics is simple, but it's not easy. So in simple terms, if you want to talk about returns agreement, for example, to places like Kosovo and other third countries, I think that's broadly welcome. The public will support that. It's quite a simple idea, but you know, the idea that you've removed the deterrent in the first place in the UK before reaching that conclusion is mad. The idea that you say to people... okay,
so why did he... I would agree totally with you. So the fact is he's now saying, well, we're now going to look at all these countries for return hubs, and we've scrapped the Rwanda scheme. And I think the public are now thinking, hang on a minute, you've got all these people coming here to the country illegally. Nothing is happening. It's getting worse. It's up, what, 35% on this time last year or thereabouts. And the Prime Minister looks like he's completely out of control.
Totally, and other things, you know, just on the economy, to say, you know, there's a £22 billion black hole, we're going to blame that for, you know, the next 5 years or more on the Tories for leaving that deficit or whatever. But the answer to that is not to then give out over-inflation busting pay rises to your union paymasters and people in the public sector twice over. You've got to, and then increase national insurance contributions on the people that are actually going to make the economy grow, that's small and medium-sized businesses in this country. You've got to say to everybody, right, we might all be in this together. I can only tinker around the edges to make sure that we're on the path. But so it's, they're not easy decisions, but it's simple politics. It's simple to have that narrative to bring people with you.
But he's now saying disability benefit claimants can get more time to seek support from this 3.4 billion welfare cut. And then he says, well, actually, we're going to give you more time. But he hasn't actually done the numbers. So when you look at actually the economy and the economics of this, he's going to basically cause a $5 billion black hole in the public finances. It's going to cost the Treasury $1.5 billion by bringing back the winter fuel payments, $3.5 billion more if he axes the two-child benefit cap. Then, as you mentioned, the public sector pay rises on top of that, and inflation on top of that. We're talking about $20 billion.
Yeah, and not to mention, you know, still, you know, Ed Miliband's GB Energy, nationalising the railways and anything else.
Oh, I love that, by the way. The first nationalised rail service was a rail replacement bus.
Exactly.
I mean, it's brilliant.
Exactly. You could, you know, if there was anything that sums up this government in terms of image, right, it is that.
But to be fair, the first privatised service was also a rail replacement bus.
Yes, well, there you go. But
under John Major, I think.
Well, you know, but that was back in the day. I mean, you know, we're in 2025. We love buses. You know, but 2025, you would have thought a bit better than that. But I think that's right. I think people will see this government are just, they haven't got a narrative, they haven't got an anchor, they haven't got a purpose. And I'm saying to people, and you know, I think people would have more respect for a government and a political party that has a sense of direction of views. So if it was Angela Rayner, let's say for argument's sake, if she wants to raise taxes, I totally disagree with that. But if she wants to spend more on public service, I totally disagree with that. If she wants to borrow more to spend, but at least she will be able to say, I'm doing that because I do want to give public sector workers a pay rise. I do want to increase spending in public services, and I also want to do X, Y, Z. That requires money.
Well, I think you know where you stand with Angela Rayner. I mean, when you look at this £5 billion, and this is only just broken in the Telegraph, they're looking at where do the tax rises come from. Now, remember, of course, they said they're not going to raise taxes on ordinary working people, whatever those people are. They're looking now at increasing the bank surcharge and additional tax on the profits of banks. They're looking on the abolition of inheritance tax relief on AIM shares. They're going to probably tax property. The income tax threshold freeze will continue. I mean, this is going to be some pretty dark days ahead.
Totally, because every day, if I was in the Treasury now, if I was in number 10, I'd be saying to people, right, what is our narrative, but what are we doing to make people want to invest in the UK, to want to stay in the UK, to want to learn? What opportunities are we giving people? What is the point of being in the UK today? Particularly if you're a young person.
What is the answer to that?
Well, I don't know.
I don't know.
Because and that's why people are leaving the UK. Yeah. You know, big investors, big business folk, they're up sticks, they're going to other international headquarters because of the taxes are too high. You know, if you're a small and medium-sized business that's going to be copped not just with that national insurance contributions, but increase in minimum wage, which is not a bad thing, I understand, but couple that with business rates increase through local authorities, you're a small business that's been hit thrice over there. You may as well shut up shop. So
which is what we're seeing.
Which is what we're seeing. So where is the thought that goes into all of this? What is?
Well, that's because they have no experience. They've never run a small business, any of them.
And that's where, to be perfectly fair, I think, you know, when people say, "Oh, Reform couldn't possibly come into government," or they couldn't run councils because they've got no experience, well, hang about. I mean, we're looking.
Well, I'd argue that Reform, and I would know this, that many of those people in Reform have run small businesses. Well, they do understand a P&L. They actually know what the mechanism of a small business is.
Well, yes, quite, yes, yeah. I stand corrected.
I'm just saying.
But you're right. No, but you're right. But there will be people that say, you know, the criticism of Reform is to say, how could they form a government? How could they possibly sort of? But you know, we're looking at a government.
Well, let's see what they do in the local in the local government.
Yes.
But let's talk about the Conservative Party, because they're in serious trouble here. Because if, according to the latest poll ratings, they're now 5th. I mean, Kemi Badenoch is in big trouble here.
I mean, it's not good. I mean that
understatement of the year.
Understatement. I mean, I was going to say what I really think. I mean, it's a disaster at the minute. If you're looking at those polls. No, I wouldn't necessarily.
Wouldn't you? Why?
Because I do think there's still an element...
Room for improvement? Could do better?
Yes, but I think that there is definitely an element of time. I think... How
much more time does she need?
Well, I mean, I think that there is some good work that's going on behind the scenes, but behind the scenes doesn't, you know, it does matter, but that shouldn't be the focus. But I think sometimes the leadership relies on, we've set up these policy commissions and therefore we're involving the members and we're getting back to the grassroots. You do need that, and I understand that, but that shouldn't be...
But she also says, I'm not going to tell you any policies at the moment, and the public are saying, well, hang on a minute, we want some policies.
And I think there are maybe the original thought processes, which is, look, you know, Keir Starmer came in, he was leader of the opposition, he was out within 5 years, that could be replicated. Absolutely true, a fair point, but Reform didn't exist in the way that it does now there. So the politics of the past doesn't, you know, account for what could be the future. So you've got to react. And so yesterday was a sign where she came out to say, actually, no, as a Tory party, we wouldn't abolish the two-child benefit cap.
Yes, clear blue water.
So that's clear blue water, clear turquoise oceans between the two. So that is now something that I think people will say, OK, if it's a choice now, if we're going to have a debate about the economy, what we can afford, what we can't, you've got 3 different policy positions there to make voters have a choice. If there's more of that comes forward, I think you might see Kemi do better in the polls.
She's back in the press today, by the way. She's denied undermining national security. She refused to use a government car. She used a private hire vehicle while serving in the cabinet. This is the Sunday Times reporting the Trade Secretary, as she was then, used a taxpayer-funded car for this private firm. And she says there isn't a story here, but there must be something going on here, because obviously people are concerned that she was basically using a minicab with top-secret documents in the back of it. She says, well, this is all above board.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, I have to say. I really don't know the basis of that story. I mean, look, all I can say is when I worked with Kemi in the Department for Levelling Up, she had a government car who was a fantastic driver called Leon, as it happens. He was a very nice man from South London.
Well, she's apparently fell out with a GCS driver, a civil servant. She blamed him for arriving because she arrived 21 minutes late to the first cabinet meeting. Oops. You don't want to do that on your first day. Disputing the directions, she then said it's not feasible or fair to make the driver who lived 2 hours away from her home in southwest London travel that far to collect her. Seems a very odd thing to say.
Well, I mean, I will look into it. I'll find out.
Would you look into it and let me know at the weekend?
I'll let you know. But all I know is from Kemi, she did have a government driver when I worked with her.
What was his name?
Leon. He was a very nice man.
Good afternoon, Leon. Let's just talk about renationalisation of railways, of course, Great British Railways. There's a sign that's appeared today, I think, at one of the railway stations saying Great British Railways. Well, the story today is the government cannot guarantee that train tickets will actually be cheaper under the nationalisation, the renationalisation of South West Railway and the rail replacement bus service, which I still think is absolutely priceless. Apparently it took about 2.5 hours to go about 20 miles or thereabouts because you had to change from the train to a bus and then back to another train. Heidi Alexander says she would love to promise lower fares. She says the day-to-day running of trains was already heavily subsidised by the taxpayer. But when you look at this, it's just nonsense. There are lots of people who've been quoted here. So a lady called Caroline, she said, we use the car because for 4 of us, it's 400 quid to get on the train. I get in my electric car for a fraction of the price. It's absolutely nuts. When you compare it with European rail travel, which is relatively cheap and very good and always on time, it's rubbish.
Yes, yeah, I think that's right. There's always been that conversation around who should pay for the trains, basically. So if you are the user, then of course, you know, you should be maybe arguably be paying more because you're using the train every day versus it just coming out of the general taxation, which could be going to social care, for example. There's always that debate that takes place. But you're right. Why price people out of? You want to encourage people to use the trains at the same time rather than driving for congestion and just, I mean, I can't think of anything worse than sitting in a car and not moving for very far. I'd rather be on a train stuck, so at least I can do some work or do something or, on a device. It's a horrible one.
But do you think the privatisation of the rail service has been an unmitigated disaster?
No, I wouldn't say that.
You think it's been good?
I think it's better than what we're going to see under a nationalised service. I really do, actually. Yeah, I just don't know who's got the time or the will or the want to sit there in central office London and mark the trains.
And of course, it hasn't even been formed yet. I believe it's actually subject to a parliamentary vote before it's even formed. And yet, we saw the brand new livery, or at least it was stuck on with a piece of sellotape on the side of a train with Heidi Alexander, didn't we?
Yes,
showcasing it. But it did look like they just basically stuck it there in the morning.
Exactly. And I think, look, what I think people are bored about when it comes to politics is just the ideology. And that's why I think the two-party system falls down. So, if you're a Conservative, I imagine you would be sitting here saying, oh, no, absolute privatisation is still the right. Let the markets decide. Let the forces, because that's what you sort of have been indoctrinated to do. If you're Labour on the left, and I'm being generalistic here, but they'll say, oh no, we must nationalise everything because these companies that have earned huge profits, they haven't run the service properly. We must take it back for the. But there is a middle ground.
I was about to say there's a middle ground because I travel by train a lot, and it is so complicated now trying to buy a ticket because you're basically met with a plethora of fares. I don't really understand how competition works on the railway when you've got one set of tracks.
Yes.
I don't understand that in the slightest. So, for example, I got fined £88 for being on the wrong train.
Yes. And that's the problem. You will have, when trains don't run on time, is it because of the tracks, which is all under National Rail's department, or is it because of the breakdown in the rolling stock, whether it's whatever company it is? And then they have to work together to work. It's all very complicated. But when it fails, there is room for government to step in to say, hold on, you maybe can't be taking home all this sort of, shares and, bonds and windfalls of, profits as a shareholder when actually the trains aren't running. So government can step in and say, but you can still run it and you run it properly. So there has to be an element of accountability where I think, put aside political ideology, then that's where I think, there's room for...
I mean, I have to say, I do think actually in terms of punctuality, it is a lot better. I remember back, I'm much older than you. I remember back in the day of good old-fashioned British Rail where nothing actually worked, nothing ran on time, couldn't open the doors half the time, and of course the creaking trains. So it has improved to that extent, but it's super expensive.
Yes. I mean, and look, there has to be a wider conversation around, how many people are now using the train still? I don't know, because there's still probably
they're very busy where I am.
Culture or, because,
I'll take you for a trip on the train, Charlie.
We could be the new Portillos.
Well, that sounds nice, and wear some comedy-coloured trousers as well.
Yes. Well, I was going to...
all right, leave my shirt alone.
Lovely shirt that you've got.
What's wrong with it?
No, it's very nice. It's bright. It's bright as you are, bright and breezy and
anyway. And bank holiday-esque.
Bank holiday-esque. I'll stop talking.
I think you should. I think you should go home now. Charlie Roney, thank you very much indeed. Former Conservative Special Advisor joining me in the studio. We'll take a break. Let me know your thoughts, please. What does the future of Britain look like under Keir Starmer if he stays in power? If he doesn't, then who should take over? Angela Rayner, is that a good idea? 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. After the break, I'll take some calls, thoughts and messages. This is Talk.
Almost a quarter of white men say they are discriminated against for their race and gender, according to a poll research commissioned for White Men Can't Work suggests nearly half of white men in the UK are self-censoring at work because they fear that saying the wrong thing could cost them their jobs. 41% say they feel anxious that they can be sacked for doing or saying the wrong thing. More than a third of those under 34 say they have lost out on a promotion or other opportunities because of their race or gender.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk. Later on, I'm going to be talking about this other story where lots of people feel that they actually are not free to say what they think, that actually they're very worried about free speech in this country. And I wondered what your thoughts are on that. Are you worried about what you say in public, in the pub, for example? Are you worried about sharing your thoughts on the state of the nation with your mates? 0344 499 1000. Lots of messages coming in. Great show, John in Upminster. Thank you. Hi, David. Getting rid of Starmer will make no difference because the UK has no future under the current Labour Party, driven as it is by blind left-wing ideology. The last Tory government was pretty incompetent, to put it kindly, but the current government is abhorrent as well as incompetent to an even greater level. Thank you for that. Tell Starmer, this is Debbie, that U-turns are the way forward. He could then get us back out of the EU. Well said. Stop net zero, leave our farmers alone. Quite right. Stop Rayner's attack on employment and let British fishers fish. Also very well said. Chris is on the line from Epsom. Hello, Chris.
Hi, hey David. Happy bank holiday.
And to you. Haven't spoken to you since, well, yesterday.
Right, let's get one thing clear.
Yes, go on.
I've never agreed. It's a quick one. I've never agreed with Matthewson on anything.
Yes.
My God, I agreed with him with everything today. He was actually saying
now, if you remember, the last time I had him on, we had rather a big confrontation, and I think I called him something quite rude. But I would agree, he was absolutely bang on the money today.
Yeah, he was. He actually concisely put what Starmer's problem is that he is a technocrat. He's lost what Labour was. I'm a bit older than you actually, Dave. Starmer's lost what Labour was. It was for working class people. It was for the workers. And
the clue is in the title.
And none of it's there. The thing that I wanted to phoned up for was Lucy Connolly.
Yes.
We've got to put some context on this.
Go on then.
All right. Okay, Starmer's saying that he had nothing to do with it. Well, that's a complete lie. He came out and called everybody a far-right thug, said they'd all been bussed in and caught trains in and they were all far-right thugs. That's been thrown out the water by the Independent Commission of Police Authorities. They concluded that it wasn't, they were just local people that were brewing up for because of what happened. Then you've got the obfuscation of Starmer and Cooper and the police and the CPS by releasing that photo of Rudy Kamana by looking like a 13-year-old choir boy in his school uniform. Didn't look much like the photograph when he was actually his actual photograph that was released.
His mugshot, yeah.
Mugshot, that's what I was looking for, yeah. Didn't look much like that, did it?
No.
Then they refused and didn't say anything about him being an Islamic fundamentalist terrorist or that he got any ideas from them, even though they had his computer that linked it to him, even though he'd made enough ricin to kill thousands of people, and he had an Al-Qaeda manual.
He did indeed, yep.
Now, and since he's been in prison, he's been going to the worship with the Islamists in prison. Now, when Lucy and the others were arrested, they were all scooped up within 2 or 3 days.
Yeah.
When they were held, they were told that because it all happened so quickly, they couldn't get bail hearings. So they wouldn't be going home for at least 5 days, maybe a week, before they could get a bail hearing. The duty lawyers then told them, look, it's not that bad. Plead guilty, you'll get a lesser sentence, and you'll be home. the fact that she then, and all the others, pleaded guilty, gives the appeal court no chance of reducing the sentence, or gives them an excuse for not. Doesn't give them no chance. It gives them a reason not to reduce the sentence. This whole thing was manufactured from Number 10. Absolutely everything that happened, and I don't care if they want to come after me about free speech, right? What they've tried to do is to put an off button in your brain so that you don't talk. You know, clever people are being made to keep quiet so ignorant people don't get offended. It's ridiculous.
But you see, I think it is a very chilling effect on free speech. I'm deeply concerned that what you're doing is driving that freedom of speech underground, and that will lead to huge problems later on.
It's exactly it, David, and that's my concern. Look, I talk to my friends, I talk to my neighbours. You know, I've got a very eclectic group of friends. They won't post anything now. They won't even talk. They won't even talk openly in a group of people. They're that worried about it. And I'm talking about, I live in Epsom in Surrey. It's a leafy Surrey suburb, all right? We've got, I've told you this before, my friends in this road include Bangladeshi, Pakistani,
yeah, you have,
Iraq, South African, Portuguese have just moved next door. Fantastic people, all of them, because it was done over time. It was done one at a time. Didn't everybody come en masse? And everybody's coming. And we've all got the same problem. We've all got the same problem of the immigrant hotel 500 metres away, and all the houses and cars getting broken into now.
But I think the point that you are making, and we've discussed before, is about assimilation, integration into the community that you live in. And we'll talk about this. Thanks, Chris. And we're going to talk about this in half an hour's time. Almost half of white men are self-censoring at work for fear of causing offence. And that's Chris's point, which is actually people are so worried now to say what they actually think in case they get locked up as well. Thanks very much for that. Keep your messages coming in. I'm asking this afternoon, what does Britain's future look like under Keir Starmer? The number 0344 499 1000. You can text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can also message us on X. Time for a quick break. After the break, I want to talk about immigration, the crisis that the United Kingdom is now suffering. Well, the latest is the UK is going to ask Kosovo to take migrants as part of this return hubs plan. I'm going to be talking to Henry Bolton, who's the international border control expert. I'll be talking to him after this break. This is Talk.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. I'm asking, what does Britain's future look like under Keir Starmer? A future under Starmer, you're having a laugh. What blinking future? We won't have a future left. That's Robin Wiltshire. Thank you for that. I've asked about Starmer's Britain. I've got a picture coming back. This is from Susan. Big Brother is watching you, is the response to what does the future look like under Starmer. It's not hard to recognise with this Starmer, who is a lawyer who can make people believe anything he says. That is exactly what a lawyer can do. All he can do in PMQs is to use his courtroom body language, and he got all his party minds programmed to say what he thinks. David, this is Stuart. With the USA monitoring the UK free speech, I'm so embarrassed that our country is in the same category as an oppressive dictatorship around the world. The only tiny solace I have is I didn't vote for him, so I have a clear conscience. Now, let's talk about illegal immigration. The latest numbers show that 13,573 illegal migrants have come into this country so far this year. 13,573. That is up, wait for this, 37% on this point last year. Now, as we know, Keir Starmer ditched the Rwanda policy within days of taking office. But this is the latest plan. We've talked about the return hubs before, but Britain is going to ask Kosovo to take small boat migrants as part of plans to open these return hubs overseas. This is according to our sister publication, The Times. The Western Balkan country is on a short list of 9 countries drawn up by ministers and officials as potential destinations for overseas hubs. The idea is that, and this is crucial, that they are rejected asylum seekers. They would be sent there after they have exhausted their avenues of appeal in the UK. Now, it's news to the president of Kosovo, apparently. This is Vjosa Osmani, said that her country would be open to talks over a potential deal to take Britain's failed asylum seekers, but my understanding is that they haven't actually been asked. Joining me now is Henry Bolton, International Border Control expert. Hello, good afternoon, Henry.
Hi, morning, David.
Morning, afternoon.
Morning, sorry, it's been one of those days, sorry.
I'm used to doing mornings as well. The whole thing is an utter shambles, isn't it? The fact is we've now at 13,573 illegal migrants, up 37% on this point last year. Keir Starmer keeps saying he's going to, you know, smash the gangs, and Kosovo is joining this list of countries, including Serbia, North Macedonia, Bosnia-Herzegovina. They say there are other countries outside Europe as well. I think it's worth remembering that he also had Albania on that list, and Albania said nil point, no.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, as you just said, these are not people who are going to be going to these hubs in order to have their asylum claims processed. They're people who have had their asylum claim rejected. They have appealed. They've appealed again. They've appealed 3 times, up to 3 times, and then they're failed. So now they're eligible for deportation. But we can't deport them for whatever reason. Perhaps they're from Afghanistan or from Iran, so we've got a logistical stroke diplomatic stroke security problem taking them back there. So what do we do with them? And so the idea is that they're going to go to these hubs. Well, if I was responsible for this in one of those countries, I would be saying, okay, so you want us to take all these Afghans, these Syrians, the Iranians and whatnot. Again, no idea who they are, what their background is really. And you've got no way of sending them back to their countries. So what's in it for us? And, you know, I don't think that the British government is going to be offering quite enough unless the Prime Minister wants to demonstrate to the British population that this is working. And somebody said yes, in which case he'll pay a great deal of money for the privilege, our money. But the other thing to remember is that the Western Balkans route, and sort of that southeast corner, if you like, is one of the main people smuggling routes into the European Union and on into the United Kingdom. So if he wants to go after the gangs, and I've said this for a long time, it's an area that he needs to concentrate on, because the governments down there in the past have cooperated with British intelligence, British law enforcement, to undertake intelligence and tactical operations to disrupt the people smuggling networks. Ironically, the funding for all of that was pulled by Tony Blair in 2006. Well, we need to reinstitute that. And rather than say to these people, right, well, you know, we're going to keep giving you these people, because this is not going to stop the boats, David. This is in no way, no shape, no form is this going to stop the boats, or even slow the flow. So we're going to continue having this flow. Are we going to continue giving these people, sending these people back to whether it's Kosovo or North Macedonia or wherever it may be? The answer is probably not, so because it won't be effective. So we still don't solve the problem, but it is one of the biggest people smuggling routes that's threatening Europe and the UK, and we need to deal with it as such rather than just pass these people back into potentially the people smuggling routes.
Well,
what do we do with them if they come back again?
Is there a fair point here to say that actually what we're doing here is, if we're paying per migrant that we say send to a return hub in Kosovo, what we're actually doing is taking advantage of Kosovo, which is one of the poorest nations in Europe?
Indeed, David. I mean, it's also a hotbed of transnational organised crime. So we're feeding that whole process, and there will be, as I say, the question, well, what's in it for us? And the only thing that Kosovo, or for that matter, probably North Macedonia or anywhere else is interested, their only interest is going to be in money, in cash. Because they are poor, because they'll take money from pretty much any government that'll offer it. But they'll be weighing up the odds. I know the area very, very well. I was a UN governor in Kosovo. For 3 years, I headed the UK's transnational organised crime efforts across that whole region from what's now North Macedonia, and I was advisor to the Albanian Prime Minister. So I know that area very, very well. And, they're not going to want these people unless there's a real benefit for them. They know that it's going to be a problem because they know that they're not going to get rid of these people. They're not going to be able to get rid of an Afghan, a failed asylum seeker any more than we are. So this is, again, the government without a strategy trying to find some sort of solution to appeasing the British population and making us all think that they're doing something.
I mean,
at the end of the day, it's Keir Starmer paying somebody else, our taxpayers' money, to do something that we don't want him to do.
Well, I think there is a sense of desperation from government because they can see that the public are sick and tired of what is going on. They see absolutely no end in sight of this. And of course, as I say,
what we need to do, David, what we need to do is, rather than keep sort of firefighting the implications of these failed asylum seekers and the boat crossings, is we need to stop them in the first place.
So how would you do that?
I've been arguing since 2014.
So Henry, how do you do that? How do you stop the boats?
Well, there are a variety of things. I mean, David, the frustrating thing here is that everybody looks for a silver bullet.
Yeah.
There's not a silver bullet. What we need is a machine gun. We need lots of bullets being fired at different targets. So we've got to deal with why the UK is attractive in the first place. We've got to deal with how they get here. We've got to deal with why they leave wherever they left from, and we need to deal with all the movement and facilitation in between. Now, a part of that is indeed working with these governments, not to house them, but to actually stop the problem in the first place, to disrupt them, which is what we were doing until 2006, I say, and quite effectively, I might add. We need to change the legislation in the United Kingdom so that we can return people more easily. They don't have the same appeals process. We need also, I think, to recognise the threat for what it is. These people need to be detained the moment they hit British shores, securely detained, behind wire, ideally in somewhere remote like the Ascension Islands, and very rapidly. If we do that with them all, as we could do if we weren't part of the European Convention on Human Rights and if we reformed the Human Rights Act, then I think you will find those boats stop very, very quickly. But you've got to have courage to do that. You've got to have the strategic acumen to do it. And we also need to reform our maritime patrol presence actually on the border. So there's a whole, because at the moment we've got about 8 different government agencies, all operating in different ways with different equipment from different places, according to different laws in the English Channel. Pollution control, air sea rescue, border force and so on. We've got all these different agencies working to different government ministries. I'll tell you what it's like out there, David. It's imagine in whatever local town you're in, and you have a police force that deals with traffic issues, another one that deals with fraud, another one that deals with assaults, another one that deals with whatever. You have all these different police forces all operating out of different police stations, all with different equipment, different uniforms, different training, different laws. And that's exactly what we've got on our borders. Everybody thinks of border force, but we've actually got a whole load of other threats out there as well. All the cocaine, all the heroin comes across our borders. We've got all sorts of insecurities there. It's just that the immigrant problem, the illegal immigrant problem, is the one that is the political hot potato at the moment, and rightly so. But there's a whole lot of work to be done, David, and the problem, in a nutshell, is that we've got a failure of leadership, a failure of vision, a failure of courage, and a failure of strategic acumen in government to be able to put this together in a proper national strategy, which is what I used to do for countries. And the UK has never been interested in doing it. Albania's done it. Montenegro's done it. North Macedonia's done it. Tajikistan's done it. All these small, poor countries have all done it. But the United Kingdom still hasn't. And it has no interest in doing so because it's not got the leadership to make it work.
Do you have confidence that if the government was to change to a different political party, that the problem would be solved?
No, I don't. And I wish I did. I've spoken to all the major parties to a lesser or greater extent, and include Reform. They have no plan. And I mean, I know people will be thinking, now you've asked that question, what about Reform? They've got a 4-point plan for stopping the boats, but that 4-point plan is frankly no plan whatsoever. It's 4 intentions. As I said to somebody very, very, very senior in the party, look, you know, when he said, well, we're going to leave the ECHR, I said, well, talk me through the steps that take you from leaving the European Convention on Human Rights to the boats actually stopping. Oh, well, that's detail. Yeah, well, if you don't have that detail, then you don't have a plan. And so it's very easy for politicians of all parties to throw a headline out there and some popular sounding intentions, and actually have no clue as to whether A, they can be implemented in the way that they're implying that they will be, and B, whether or not they're effective, and indeed C, how they would be paid for, who's going to actually do it, what laws you have to amend. That then starts to become a plan if you put all that together. But no party, none, has got that. The closest is probably the Social Democrat Party, but I'm helping them with that. But there is nobody out there who is likely to be in Downing Street at the present time that has got a plan. And I know people are going to be annoyed at that because they think Reform is the answer, but I promise you, Reform has no better plan than any of the other political parties. And I'm open to helping anyone because we've got to solve this problem. And I'm more than frustrated. I'm angry that politicians want to do the easy politics and throw out popular headlines, whether it's Labour, whether it's Conservatives, whether it's Reform, whoever, but they don't want to actually do the difficult work of the planning and the detail. You'd have to ask them why not.
Henry, really good to talk to you. Henry Bolton there, international border control expert. We'll take a break. After the break, your thoughts, calls and messages. This is Talk. Good afternoon.
Almost a quarter of white men say they are discriminated against for their race and gender, according to a poll research commissioned for White Men Can't Work, suggests nearly half of white men in the UK are self-censoring at work because they fear that saying the wrong thing could cost them their jobs. 41% say they feel anxious that they can be sacked for doing or saying the wrong thing. More than a third of those under
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. This is Talk. Lots of messages coming in. Conservatives will not get back to Downing Street anytime soon. They started all these problems when us commoners were saying, look, no more immigration. We're a small island. We're full. We were labelled racist, and it got worse and worse. Now, those calling us racist finally see the light. The London bubble needs to visit the public of this country. completely different subject, actually. David, regarding the Chagos Island giveaway, this is Stuart. Now is the time for a full judicial inquiry into giving away a British territory. The inquiry should have powers to imprison anyone found not to be acting in Britain's best interest. Joanna in Salisbury, one of our regulars. Good afternoon to you, Joanna. Kosovo. That's another joke. They will take them after they've exhausted all other avenues of appeal. That's newspeak for after it's cost us hundreds of thousands of pounds through the courts. I mean, it was interesting, actually, Henry saying that actually no political party has the answer to this. I hope he is talking to the other political parties, because my understanding, and I'm being very careful what I'm saying here, is there is a detailed plan that has emerged from other political parties. I will leave that there. Keep those messages coming in, please. Let's take some calls, though. Matt is on the line from Cheshire. Good afternoon, Matt.
Hi, good afternoon, David. We've never been more technologically advanced in the ways of monitoring our borders, i.e. satellite, drones, and the ability to sort of see where people are. And we're being led to believe for 4 to 5 years now that the French can't see 40 men running down the street with a dinghy, and then there's this invisible gang of wherever they're from, maybe Albanians or whatever, hidden in a big hut somewhere with 1,000 dinghies piled high. And I believe from day one this is total nonsense. The French government are the people smuggling gangs, and we're paying to facilitate them.
You mean figuratively rather than literally?
Well, we've never been told what nationality these gangs are. We've never been told that any of them have been caught. We've never been told anything about any court cases brought against them. And I think the French basically are filtering off the dregs out of their own society and purposely pushing them to that corner of France.
I mean, to be fair to the French, there are obviously migrants all over the place who are desperate to come to the UK, and the reason for that is because, of course, we treat them very well and better than they are treated in France. I certainly agree with you that the French lack the political will to stop the gangs. They don't want to do that. And actually, looking back, Yvette Cooper said France has agreed that law enforcement can stop migrant boats at sea for the first time since 2018, led by a 70-strong police unit called the Compagnie de Marche. It's not working, is it?
Well, we defended our borders with the brass telescopes over 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And, you know, we saw boats coming towards Britain from the coast. And this idea that 70 miles of coastline can't be monitored by a few men with drones and mobile phones and a few cars is absolute drivel. You can see a single person in Tora Bora from a satellite image and drop a bomb on them. It's total nonsense, David.
So are you saying that the government just lacks the political will? Because what they're trying to do is that they say that they need to have the approval of the UNHCR, which is what they've got for these return hubs, and they say that this is going to be important, and they've lined up all these countries, and it does strike me that these countries are desperate for cash, and I think that they're being used in many ways. Kosovo, Serbia, North Macedonia, Bosnia, Herzegovina, and of course Albania, which was the one that they really had put all their money on, banked on, said no thanks.
The rules-based global order is the excuse for not stopping any of this. If Britain said, right, we're going to go out to sea, we're going to throw tear gas into the boats, or we're going to fire a few shots above the heads. If we spoke to the Macron, who's got a slap in the chops from his wife, and we said, we're prepared to go to war, and we're prepared to do anything it takes to stop this, you're spitting on our face, laughing at us. Our own government is spitting in the public's face even more than the French government. I think it's something to do with Brexit. We will allow you a deal if you take all these people and never whinge about it.
I mean, I think that's a really interesting point, that obviously I don't think the relationship with France has been that good. I mean, it was very interesting when you saw Ursula von der Leyen saying that we now have a new relationship, which basically meant the reason that she's saying that is because Keir Starmer has essentially yielded to the EU's every wish and demand, and we're now a subservient player.
Well, it all started after we left the EU and during COVID. That's a bit of a coincidence, isn't it? That suddenly this had never happened in 40 years of being in the EU, and during a downtime where we were all stuck at home, unable to find information and do anything about it or protest, that this all began. So, and we've had probably the two most gutless governments in the history of Britain in the last two parliamentary cycles. So everyone I know in the Northwest is going to vote Reform. I'm going to vote Reform until they're in power. So I say bring it on, David.
So can I just ask you about that? Because Henry Bolton said no political party, including Reform, has a plan to sort out the illegal immigration problem. Do you believe that Reform UK, and I have to be slightly careful what I say here, but do you think Reform does have a plan?
I've heard Richard Tice say for 2 or 3 years that he's read all the documents about the law of the sea, and there are...
The UN Convention of the Seas, 1951.
Yeah, he said 2 or 3 years ago. I don't think he'd be saying that on air for that long a period unless there were clauses in there that could back him up. And he also said, we'll meet them halfway and we'll take them back. And it's perfectly legal. And the British people would get behind that 100%.
I think they would. Matt, really good to talk to you. Let's talk to Sean now, who's in Cyprus. Good afternoon to you.
Yeah, David, first of all, can I thank you and all your colleagues for championing free speech, which is a very important issue in the UK and the West today. My main point is talking about Lucy Connolly after the Southport. Yeah. And I would like to ask your researchers to look into a video post that I won't call him Sir, I will call him Keir Starmer.
Yep.
Because I can only refer to someone coming from a very Irish working class background as Sir. I can't refer to him as Sir. But I'd like to ask your researchers to look into a post or a video very shortly after that where he said the following, and I don't know if I got it verbatim, but he said this: we will arrest, charge, and I underline the following word, remand and sentence all these right-wing thugs for what they have done.
Yep.
Now, as a lawyer, which I presume he is, although he's ever turned in, he's never spoken to a jury or a judge. He's only directed prosecutions. The key word, David, is here, remand.
Yep.
If you are arrested, which he said, you will be charged, you will be arrested, and let your producers look into this video, remanded. Now, habeas corpus, your barristers will tell you, you cannot be remanded like that.
So are you essentially? Sorry, time is very tight. Are you saying essentially this is two-tier justice? That essentially he had already decided he was going to come down hard on what he decrees as hard right vandals and thugs stirring up or inciting racial hatred?
It's a bit more
nuanced
than that. As a lawyer, you cannot remand someone. They can be arrested. They can be charged. Where was the bail? That was remanded in a police station. You can imagine the intensity and the fear that those people, whatever they said, were going through. And you're remanded in a police station for 2-3 days.
I mean, it's a really interesting point, and of course that was the point that was made earlier, which is they were told that actually they wouldn't be allowed out, they wouldn't get any legal advice, so therefore they should plead guilty because it would lead to a less harsh sentence. And I think that is a very important point, and the whole point about the justice or the lack of the justice, and that is what Suella Braverman is pointing to, sort of is underpinned by the way they were treated and the advice they were given at that time. Really good to talk to you as well, Sean. Thank you very much. I'm asking this afternoon, what does Britain's future actually look like under Sir Keir Starmer? Let me know, 0344 499 1000. I was talking to Professor Sir John Curtis earlier. Dr. David Esquire, that's very kind, David in the Cotswolds, So what Professor Sir John is missing is that both the main parties, whichever flavour it is, have completely moved away from their core values and therefore their core voter base. The leadership of both of the parties are only interested in being in power, however badly they end up running the show. Look at Cameron, look at May, Johnson and now Starmer. It is not that Reform are doing better than the other two, but it is that Farage offers values that people can vote for. And the same with Rayner. She offers her own different values that other people may wish to vote for. At least you know what you're going to get with either of those two. Johnson and Starmer offer none of that, and the voters of their respected side knows that. David, thank you very much indeed. I agree with that, actually. I think you know what you're getting with those two particular politicians. Stuart says, David, future under Keir Starmer is a hopeless, fearful place under high taxes, huge immigration, and we'll take a break.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Yay!
8722, start your message with the word talk. Who would you send to space and why?
The person I would love to send to space would be Mr. Keir Starmer. And then I would tell the Galactic Empire that he was part of the Rebel Alliance and let them blow him away with the Death Star. No Brits was involved, no fingers could be pointed.
You carry on taking the medication, George. Yes, I'd send all the Labour government to space with a one-way ticket and throw in the SNP for being useless. They're all a bunch of... Oh, all right, fair enough.
One person, quite frankly, I think needs to go to space in a one-way journey is Jeremy Kyle. He goes on about his age one more time, how he's 60 this year, he was 59 last year, repetitively over the course of the weeks and months. We have to hear him, I'm 60 this year, I'm 60 this year.
Richard Tice, did you put that cheeky bugger up to that?
I'm hoping he's going to send me the invoice because that was absolutely brilliant.
Which MP would you send to space?
Although I'll get in terrible trouble if I answer that. But it's fair to say there's quite a long list.
The sad thing is about sending people into space on a one-way ticket is I don't think that we've built a spaceship big enough to take the lunatics off this planet. I mean, from the net zero loonies to the transgender loonies to the racists to the terrorists, there is just so much to the wokerati. We need some big spaceships.
Big spaceships.
Good evening. I never know how you're going to start this conversation, Jeremy.
Katy Perry went to space today, OK? Who would you send... I'd love her to say what I wanted to, but I'd never disrespect her. Who would you send to space who could never come back?
Well, I'd be happy to send Ed Miliband to space, I think.
Oh, that is an outrageous question, so I'm not even going to answer that question.
Sam Matterface, so you get the job, yeah? Come on.
No, Sam Matterface, I tell you what, there's no...
I think David Lammy would be the person I'd want to send up in space and never come back again.
Yeah, the problem is how much would the bill be for him to munch through whatever food on the way there?
Hey, it worked.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Hello, a very good afternoon to you. Just after 3 o'clock now on Monday, May the 26th. I'm David Bull in for Ian Collins. A very good afternoon to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this afternoon. Now, coming up this hour, Prime Minister Keir Starmer has been warned that U-turns on policies like winter fuel payments and the two-child benefit cap risk making him look weak and insecure, will do little to revive his flagging poll ratings and could fuel fresh talk of a leadership challenge. Meanwhile, the White House says it's monitoring the case of Lucy Connolly as campaigners raise concerns with US officials over what they call draconian hate speech laws and growing free speech tensions under Labour. And a new report reveals that hundreds of NHS bosses are earning more than the Prime Minister, some up to, wait for this, £340,000, despite failing to reduce record-high waiting lists. Do get involved this afternoon, please. You can call 0344 499 1000. Those calls charged at the national rate. You can also text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can message us on X as well at talkTV. I'm asking this afternoon, good afternoon, by the way. I'm asking this afternoon, what does Britain's future look like under Keir Starmer? That's the big question of the day. And many of you getting in touch about that. Stuart in Perthshire says, David, if Starmer is in charge until 2029, then there'll be nothing left to salvage. Britain will be finished. Dan in Kent, one of our regulars, good afternoon to you. The trouble with having a whipping system in politics is Parliament becomes focused more on party politics rather than constituency issues. The disconnect between the people and Westminster is then so vast. The point is, though, as a member of Parliament, you are elected by your constituency, so that is your number one priority. And party politics should come second to being that constituency member of Parliament. Jess in Dover says, hi, David, I do think there is a clear sense of direction from Labour. They want to instigate the kind of change that puts middle-aged, middle-class, white people here in their place. I'm afraid of the police now. I'm afraid that my savings will be raided. I'm afraid to speak my mind. I think I'm supposed to take my turn being oppressed. Wow, thank you, Jess. Good afternoon, David. Reece Starmer and his so-called freedom of speech. England hasn't got freedom of speech at all. I work for a big organisation who would put anyone on a diversity and equality course who says anything that is not woke. Thankfully, after almost 38 years in the service of a large organisation, I will be retiring in about 6 weeks. Then I will be able to say what I think without being given an ear-bashing. That's Jade. Jade, thank you very much. Well, that is very pertinent indeed, because the White House says it is monitoring the case of Lucy Connolly in an escalation of these free speech tensions. State Department officials are examining the treatment of Connolly, the wife of a Conservative councillor who was jailed, as we know, for what she wrote on social media. It was a terrible thing that she wrote. She then thought better of it, deleted the post. It was seen, 31,000 times. But the sentence seems completely out of kilter with the crime that she committed. 31 months in prison, and so the White House is now looking at the United Kingdom and wondering whether we really do have free speech. And there's another story today in the Telegraph. Half of all white men are self-censoring at work for fear of causing offence. This is according to a new poll. Research by JL Partners found almost a quarter of them, 23%, believe they experience discrimination because of their race and gender. And this is particularly pertinent to that message that I've just had. 41% said they worried they would be sacked if they said the wrong thing, whilst a third believed that white men were the least valued employees in their workplace. Bob Seeley, former Conservative Member of Parliament, joins me now. Good afternoon to you, Bob.
Hi, David, and good afternoon to your listeners and viewers.
Really good to see you once again. What's your take on this, the White House saying it's monitoring free speech in the United Kingdom? That's very concerning, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty concerning. Look, it's part of Trump's playbook. I'm not saying he's wrong in this case. I think sometimes I'm not his biggest fan, but personally, yeah, look, this is an odd case, and I think it really is. It worries me, and I think it should worry people. Look, her tweet was offensive and unpleasant. Okay, in a world full of frankly unpleasant and offensive tweets, there's you don't have to look very far to see that stuff out there. She removed it after 4 hours, and I do think there's a case that the law has come down and treated her in a way that it hasn't treated others. And if you look, there's a Labour councillor who said he wanted to slit people's throats. Yeah. He's on bail. The police have arrested somebody, a Jewish protester, if I understand correctly, for having a nasty picture about that murdering terrorist scumbag, Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah.
Correct.
Offensive to the Hezbollah community. So
even though it's a prescribed terrorist organisation.
Well, exactly. It's sort of offensive to the terrorist supporting community and maybe some terrorists in London. I just find it extraordinary. I've actually just got Wes Streeting's old tweets up as well, David. And OK, this is back from 2009. But he says there would be nothing natural about Jan Muir's death. She's a journalist, if I understand, if I shoved the bigoted old bag under a train. Well, I mean, is that incitement to kill?
Yes, I would say it is.
Okay, I personally don't think that people should be being arrested for tweets. I think people should be arrested for shoplifting, of which there's way too much of, and violent crime, which is getting worse, organised begging, all this other stuff, actual genuine crimes.
I mean, it's really interesting about this on social media. I see people writing stuff on social media you would never say in public. If you're in the pub, you would never, ever say what you put on social media.
Well, you wouldn't say it to somebody's face. I mean, I still get it now. People think you can just be entirely, and they're all lefties. They wear their moral virtue. They wear their moral virtue with their deep personal unpleasantness and sometimes personal issues.
Yeah.
People behave in a way that you just wouldn't to somebody's face, and it's actually a form of sort of cowardice that you just think that there's nobody listening or reading it at the other end. And I think that is it's a bad thing for our society and a bad thing for our era. But basically, look, if you want to be a fool on Twitter, fair enough. If you want to say obnoxious things, I personally don't think police should be arresting these Palestinian protesters. I think they're absolutely vile, and I think the police should be doing much more to support Jewish people to make sure they are comfortable in London, because Jewish people are now increasingly discomforted by all this repugnant anti-Semitism we're seeing. But I mean, they should not be policing tweets, and they certainly shouldn't be arresting people for an offensive tweet that was taken down 4 hours later. I'm afraid to say I think people who are concerned about two-tier justice frankly are spot on, and the hypocrisy of these left-wing sort of elite who think they're obeying the law, or do you think they are, it should be government by lawmakers? It's their interpretation of the law which almost always fits in with their sub-Marxist beliefs.
So were you surprised by the Court of Appeal actually saying that her sentence shouldn't be reduced?
I was actually. I would have. I mean, I just don't understand. If we had a very draconian system of law in this country, if we were like sort of Singapore and sort of policed tweets in the same, evenly with a harshness, you could at least say it's consistent. I personally don't think we should be policing opinions unless there's significant evidence of incitement to violence, either collectively or individually. The sort of thing that Wes Streeting might have been posting when he said, let's push Jan Muir underneath a train, for example. But a crass post from Lucy Connolly, deleted 4 hours later, no, I don't think the police should be doing
also, I mean, her tweet was done in the heat of the moment. It was an absolutely horrific crime that was committed, and of course people were very upset about it. I would also blame the government. There was this complete lack of information, a void of information, and that fed all the conspiracy theories. And of course the government then came out and said there was absolutely no terrorist link, and of course that was proven to be untrue.
Yeah, I have to say, either it was just, look, I will give the government, try to be fair on them. I think maybe they were finding their feet and they just reacted in a way that lefties do, in a very, very bad way. Or it showed a real contempt for white working class people in this country. But their behaviour, saying, oh, he's a nice little choir boy from Cardiff. And then you saw that sort of picture, which is the personification of evil. I just think the way that they lied to people and said, oh, nothing to do with terrorism, it's a one-off, he's a nice kid, he's from Cardiff. I just think the catalogue of half-truths and mistruths and misleading statements, I think it was emblematic of the way that this government treats the indigenous population, and I would include all colours in that as well. So it's not just about working class whites, it's working class black people, Asian people who've been here for generations, but the way it treats their concerns, the concerns of working communities up and down the country, I thought was really disturbing.
You see, I hear repeatedly from people saying they won't actually commit anything, even to WhatsApp, because they're worried about the thought police coming after them. It leads nicely to this new poll, actually. Almost half of white men are self-censoring at work for fear of causing offence. That's exactly what one of our callers said earlier on. 41% said they're worried they would be sacked if they said the wrong thing. Now, looking at this survey that was done by White Men Can't Work, millions of men, according to Tim Samuels, former host of the BBC show Men's Hour and host of White Men Can't Work, says millions of men are walking around on eggshells at work. They're too scared to speak freely. The scale of discrimination, self-censorship and anxiety is staggering. I would agree 100% with that.
Yeah, look, I mean, the problem is when racism becomes what the victim thinks it is, in some cases, it might, what somebody says may be racially vile and unpleasant and threatening, in which case you should take action because you don't want people like that in your workplace. But if it's the interpretation of something, it doesn't necessarily have to be believable for a case to be made against you or I or anyone of a white skin watching this programme or listening to it. So the problem is we just have the law which is geared up for a, what can you say here, David? It's geared up to feed a festering resentment and a class of individual and a type of individual who's happy to game the system and to gain by taking offence, whether it's an organisation taking offence or whether it's individuals taking offence. So prejudice isn't something that you or I or a jury would see as being prejudice, but it's something that somebody who's maybe looking for prejudice would seem to be offensive. And I think that's just completely taken us in a bad direction. We've got the equality law. It's got to go. I don't know why we didn't do it when we were in power. It was more fool us. The ECHR, get rid of it. Human Rights Act, you've got to get rid of all these new Labour era laws so government can govern, but also people can feel that they can...
But you say that, and I agree wholeheartedly with you, but you didn't do it. Why didn't you do it?
I don't know, mate. I was never a minister, and maybe there was a reason for that. In a perfect world, Rishi would have had 2 years reset, and he would have just said, we're getting rid of this stuff. We're going to net zero on immigration. We're actually going to listen to people's concerns. And we did. And as they say, the rest is history, David. I can't answer that question, but I can tell you that there was genuine frustration, not only from people like me, but also from the Red Wall MPs. Best thing that happened to many Red Wall constituencies was the folks who came in to represent them in 2019. And the really sad thing, they were swept away because we had too many of our colleagues had been there for a long time, were pretty complacent, and actually weren't really interested in listening to the concerns of those communities. And as I say, the rest is history.
Do you think the tide is turning? Have we reached peak woke? Do you think that we are actually going to be able to speak our minds, to speak freely? I mean, I'm thinking back to this pub banter ban. This is back in April, the banter ban being brought in as part of Labour's controversial workers' rights programme.
My answer to that, sorry to say this, is yes and no. So intellectually, people like you and us, you and I, we don't have a problem saying what we're saying on air.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 years ago, you get somebody complaining to the BBC saying they're encouraging racism or some utter garbage. But I mean, nowadays, there is an open disagreement and a contempt for the people who have been milking this system for this sort of grievance culture. Do we think it's run its course yet? No, because as you say yourself, David, you've got these banter laws now, and it's going to get probably worse before it gets better. But clearly, intellectually and morally, that case has already been won because so many people now are so fed up with this and so fed up with the lack of clarity from politicians, cowardly politicians about this as well.
Can I just ask you finally about the latest polling and Keir Starmer? And of course, he's now saying he might U-turn. Well, he is not quite saying that. He's saying we'll look at the next fiscal event about the winter fuel payments, for example. It seems to me that Keir Starmer lacks any kind of ideology or sense of direction, or I have no idea what he stands for. Equally, Kemi Badenoch, I think she's in serious trouble. The Tories now in 5th place. I've never seen that in my lifetime.
I have not seen the very latest polls, but I'm sure they're not good for the Tories.
Conservative Party, 33 seats. This would be down 88 at 17.9% below the SNP. Here's the latest poll. So Reform UK, 319, up 314. Labour down 277. Lib Dems up 8. SNP up 35. Conservatives down 88 from an already terrible position.
I don't know what to say, mate. It's not good for either of the main political parties. I think it's a disaster. I think there's a massive change coming in British politics.
Bob, always good to talk to you. Thank you ever so much for your time on a bank holiday Monday. Bob Seeley there, former Conservative Member of Parliament. What are your thoughts on that? Are you worried about what you say at work? Are you worried what you say in the pub? I know that I'm very happy to speak my mind, but I do know that certainly in the office environment, some people are very concerned about what they say, particularly in the pub. As I said, I've got friends and colleagues who say, I will not even write this on WhatsApp in case the thought police come after me. Are you worried about being called out for what you say? Surely we should be able to have free speech, open and honest discussion, to challenge ideas. That's the whole point of a free society, isn't it? 0344 499 1000. I'll take your calls and messages after this break.
I can't afford it. I mean, that's £3.5 billion a year, I think, to scrap that. And, you know, the public finances are already in a total mess. I mean, I think the deficit this year is something like £160 billion. It would have been 110 billion. Well, it was 110 billion forecast to be when Rachel Reeves took over. She's already taxing and spending phenomenal amounts of money. She just can't afford it. The taxpayer can't afford it.
What would you do about the winter fuel allowance?
Well, reverse it. We've already said we would.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Welcome back. In a minute, I'm going to be talking about this shocking story. Hundreds of NHS bosses are pocketing salaries higher than the Prime Minister's. It is extraordinary. 300 receive packages of more than £200,000. And, of course, Keir Starmer earns £172,153. This is the first ever NHS rich list, where it seems that managers are being rewarded for appalling performance in the NHS. Michael in Bridgend says, "Hi, David, the public sector is paid for with public money. It's taxpayers' money. Therefore, the pay scale should be equitable with average taxpayer salaries. No one in capitals in the public sector deserves six figures. It should be capped at 99,000, with the only exception being the most skilled and experienced doctors and surgeons." We'll discuss that later, but surely then the problem is, don't you want to pay good salaries so you get great managers, great doctors, great surgeons? If you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Isn't that a problem? Let me know your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. Also, free speech. Are you worried about what you say in this country now, in public, in case someone reports you to the thought police? On the phone is Heather in Gavan. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, David. Donald Trump was right to get involved with the Lucy Conley situation, because it's about time somebody speaks on her behalf. And it's about time we need somebody like Donald Trump to weigh into this argument of freedom of speech. We are the founder of freedom of speech through our entire history of our country.
So where I mean, don't you think it's
creators of freedom of speech?
Sure. But don't you think it's embarrassing that it takes the US president to get involved to tell Britain that freedom of speech is important?
No, it's important because America, they have it in the Constitution.
Sure.
Their Constitution in the is number one is freedom of speech, and we are the founder of. We helped to create the United States of America.
Well, quite.
We created freedom of speech in this country, and it went to America, and they put into their Constitution, and which is carved out in stone.
So let me just ask.
Freedom of speech has always been there. We've got Speaker's Corner. We've got the speech box.
Good point.
And we need to remember that. We need to remember that our history is stand on freedom of speech, of expressing one's opinions and one's thoughts. We shouldn't go to jail for freedom of speech, for God's sake. We are not living in China or North Korea or in Russia where they don't have freedom of speech. We are blessed to have freedom of speech in this country, and we need to start respecting that freedom of speech, and we need to keep on going with that freedom of speech. Lucy Conley, a political prisoner like all the other prisoners who are sending stuff on Twitter, should never ever go to prison on their thoughts and their opinions. It shouldn't be a criminal offence. It should be just to say we need to be cautious in what we say.
Well, what about if someone incites violence by what they say on social media, like we need to burn the hotel down and murder people in that hotel? What about that? That's incitement to violence.
Incitement is like, it needs to be like a harsh saying, you do not incite violence. Why not have a sensible, logical conversation to that person saying, what you're doing and what you're saying is wrong. It shouldn't be a criminal offence. It should be just a harsh warning and harsh, logical talk. Get in person round the table and talk about it instead of putting them in jail, and just really sit and say, we need some logic, sensible, common sense talk. By having that, instead of jailing them, we need to have this logic and common sense and freedom of speech.
Well said, Heather. Well said. Heather in Gavan then. Tony is in West Sussex. Good afternoon.
Hi. 2 or 3 Sundays ago, you weren't doing your Sunday show.
Oh, sorry. It was my birthday.
Yeah, I know. That was the day I did it. I sent an email to the White House in America.
All right.
And I basically said, dear Mr. President, we have problems in my country, the United Kingdom. We have limited freedom of speech, and it's getting more and more difficult for people to speak their mind without being thrown in prison. I mentioned Lucy Connolly and the situation that she was in, that once upon a time in this country we'd have said silly cow and moved on and talked about something else. Today we pick her up and we throw her in prison for 31 months.
Yeah.
We are losing our freedoms. Anything the United States could do would be greatly appreciated. Finally, don't take Canada as your 51st state. Why don't you take the whole of the United Kingdom? We'd all be a lot better off.
I'm not sure everyone would agree with that, but it's an important point. Where did it go wrong?
It went wrong because the lefties in this world don't like to be opposed. The right-wingers, as I said earlier to you, if you say something that upsets me, I say, oh, for God's sake, get stuffed. Move away. And I walk on, I forget it, and I do something else. The lefties take it to their heart. I'll get you. I will have revenge. What can I do? I know I'm Prime Minister. I'm going to tell all the courts, put these people away. Give them very strict sentences. And that's what the courts did. People were put away within a week.
Are you surprised by the appeal?
2 years before they go to court.
But are you surprised by the appeal? The fact is that I think everyone agrees that this is a way overreaction. There's no way that what she did should represent 31 months in prison.
It's the bully in the playground with a great big stick saying, anybody steps out of line, I'm going to smash you over the head with this. So everybody says, oh, about not do anything. So Starmer carries on.
So
he will continue to carry on.
Do you think it will backfire on Starmer?
Well, of course it will. It's already backfiring. Everybody's talking about it. I go down the old golf club and see a few friends I used to play golf with. They're all talking about it. Everyone's talking about it in the shops. Lucy Connolly is as famous as any person in history in this country.
Are you worried?
Everyone goes, oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. I know what you mean.
Yeah, and are you worried about what you might text someone or put on WhatsApp?
No. I'm not on Facebook. I'm not on Instagram. I think that's for morons. So I just live my life and I enjoy it. But I'm very, very much into politics and what's going on. The Tories are finished, by the way. The Tories lied to us, Boris Johnson. They will never, ever, ever get into power again. I don't care what Kemi Badenoch does. And Labour have cooked their goose in the last 10 months. There is only one party going forward, and that is Reform. And I know they're not tried and tested, but then neither were Labour after 14 years. And look what they're doing.
And are you confident? Just going back, let's just go back to a previous section that we did on immigration. Are you confident that Reform does have a plan to deal with illegal migration?
They can't do any worse than what's being done, which is nothing.
It's a very, very strong point. Tony, really good to talk to you this afternoon. That's Tony in West Sussex. Keep your messages coming in, please. So many coming in. I mentioned if you pay peanuts, you get monkeys. Howard says, David, we're not paying peanuts and we have very expensive monkeys. How much worse can the cheaper monkeys be? Yeah, it's a really good point, actually. How much worse can the cheaper monkeys be? David, you just said if we pay management in the NHS too little, we get monkeys. As the NHS is run so badly, paying high wages, run by humans, maybe monkeys should get a go. Great thought-provoking show. Thanks very much, Steve in Cambridge, for that. This one, I've only just found out you can't post an England, Scottish or Welsh flag emoji on YouTube and other platforms. What? What's going on? Sinister. They changed the Union Jack on football shirts too. I'll have to look into that. Something is going on in this country. No name on that. I'm sure I recently posted a St George's flag on, certainly on X. I don't know about YouTube. We'll have a look at that as well. Hello, David. Dr. David, this is Michelle in Swanage, just across the water. Hello, good afternoon to you. What a nice surprise to have you entertaining us this afternoon. That's very sweet. I always think Bob Seeley seems a good man, and I'm sure he's a loss to the Isle of Wight. It would be great to see him standing for reform at the next election. I reckon he would win. That is a really intriguing thought. Keep those messages coming in, please. What does the future of this once great country look like under Keir Starmer? Also, do you feel safe saying what you think on the streets? The number 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk in your message to 87222. You can WhatsApp us as well, a message to the same number as well. Now, we'll take a break. After the break, I want to talk about the NHS. Obviously, it's very close to my heart. It is in serious trouble. I want to talk about the scandal of these fat cats. The first ever NHS rich list has been published. Nearly 300 health bosses are handed packages worth over £200,000. That is more than the Prime Minister of this country is paid. We'll discuss that after this break.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
3 already on Monday. Wow, that time has flown. Thanks ever so much for your contribution. Some really thought-provoking stuff, actually. This is interesting as well. Imogen in London, good afternoon to you. Good afternoon, David. If I was younger, I would emigrate. Do you know, that's fascinating. It might not be ideal, but what is happening in this country terrifies me. It really terrifies me. This government is one of the worst we have ever had. Do you know, out of my peer group, and we are of a certain age, the number of my friends saying they've had enough and want to emigrate, and now that includes actually my family saying, where could we live? Where is a better country to live? And that would never have crossed our minds before now. I would agree. I think this is one of the worst governments I've ever seen as well. And it's the lack of sort of direction, a lack of clear policy. No one has a clue what this government is going to do next. Now they're talking about taxing people even more. They've never run any companies. They're already fleecing all the small businesses, and we're seeing all the pubs shutting as a result of the fact that no one can afford to have any staff anymore. Keep all of these messages coming in. This started under the Tories. This is Paul. Look at how they describe white men in adverts now. Slimy, creepy and stupid. This is about white men feeling they can't actually, they certainly aren't valued in the workplace, and they can't speak their mind as well. Free speech, David, this is Luke, has killed my workplace. The staff room has become like Gestapo, with police listening to every conversation so they can report it to senior management. My colleagues have now invented a coding system so we can talk without fear or sanctioning. What is happening to this country? Joanna, David, you will know when we've reached peak of woke, because we can go back to being ourselves. This is also interesting. Tanya, good afternoon to you. Hi, David. A colleague saw me on the ballot paper for reform last year. She didn't speak to me again. What is going on in this country? Keep those messages coming in, please. I want to talk about the NHS now. We all know the NHS is in serious trouble. 200 billion quid, by the way, we spend on the NHS. 11.7% of GDP is a huge amount of money that we spend on the NHS. And when it's good, it's great. When it's terrible, it's absolutely terrible. Hundreds of NHS bosses are pocketing salaries higher than the Prime Minister. It's nearly 1,700 fat cats, bureaucrats and NHS trusts were handed more than 100,000 a year, with record sums already being poured in by taxpayers. The first ever NHS rich list found that 512 managers banked salaries higher than Keir Starmer at 172,153. Nearly 300 received packages of 200,000 or more. Well, joining us now is Joanna Marchong, spokeswoman for the Taxpayers Alliance. Good afternoon to you. Tell us what your findings showed.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me on. This is, as you said, the first ever NHS rich list that compiles together all senior managers in NHS trusts earning over £100,000. What we've seen is, and what we've known really, and what Wes Streeting also knows, is that the number of these senior managers on ridiculous pay packets have risen year on year. And after Wes Streeting has made his speech saying that he's going to incentivise NHS senior staff and senior managers to say, well, you're not going to get bonuses, you're not going to get pay rises unless your trust is performing, the TPA have helpfully compiled all the senior managers, their wages and their total remunerations, and put it right up against the referral to waiting times and how well they're doing on keeping to their A&E timings, that it should be, you should be no longer in A&E for over four hours. And not many trusts have actually come through on that promise. And we've just made it clear and simple.
You really have. I was just looking at these numbers. They're extraordinary. So do you want to just tell us some of them? I'm just looking at, say, for example, Dr. Michael van der Voort, Chief Medical Officer at West Hertfordshire Hospitals, earning £357,500. The Chief Executive of the Royal Marsden, Dame Callie Palmer, £312,500 last year. The Chief Medical Officer at University Hospitals of Bristol and Weston, £322,500. Also, it wasn't just, from what I read earlier on, it wasn't actually just the bosses of these hospitals. There are people in senior position in these hospitals who are, quite frankly, are being paid far too much for what they're doing.
Yeah, you're completely right again. So you'll see that the worst trust by percentage of A&E attendances that were seen in less than 4 hours was actually Cambridge and Peterborough NHS Trust. And you're waiting there for over half a year, basically, from being diagnosed with what you have to then getting the treatment for it. They had 8 senior managers that were over £100,000. Their chief medical staff was, and medical director, sorry, was on close to £400,000 a year.
What?
And no, it's exactly that, and it's the same story again with the A&E waiting times and the referral treatment. Often you see that in many of the trusts that have one of the lowest and ranked the lowest for how many patients they're seeing and their performance, they're taking home massive pay packets, and sometimes it's chief of staff as well. So not even doctors or nurses who are striking, and quite frankly, deserve it for the time and effort that they put in, but you have these kind of backroom bureaucrats making a lot more.
You see, so all my colleagues who are my medical colleagues, the doctor colleagues, are telling me that they feel so impotent in the current system. They have absolutely no autonomy. They're told when they can and can't operate. They often go and turn up and they try and do an operation that half the staff are missing, and you've got these managers waltzing around earning tons of money. Actually, I'm not sure how much they contribute.
No, exactly. And it's as you said, they're holding things back, and it's very logical to think that if you have too many cooks in the kitchen, the operation isn't going to be as successful, or the organization isn't going to be run as smoothly. Again, Wes Streeting has picked up on this point, so it's on everyone's radars.
He has, but his plan is to give you even bigger bonuses if you hit certain targets. Not to say, actually, let's cap the amount that you earn, and then if you do well, we'll give you a bonus.
Exactly. That was going to be my follow-up point, where you're just sort of incentivizing short-term gains. We'll cut back here, or we'll have a boost in productivity. But because wages are already so high, you're gonna incentivize almost the wrong people to do their job, and you're not going to cut down on the staff itself.
It seems extraordinary. Were you surprised by your findings?
No, I don't think I was. The TPA do these findings all the time. What it seems to be is that our organisation is really good for holding the public sector to account, and we haven't done an NHS rich list, especially on senior staff, and the number has grown. I'm quite frankly, the most shocking thing is the 512 people on salaries above the Prime Minister's, and the 17 people who are on salaries above 300,000.
OK, but the counter-argument is that because it's so complicated to run the NHS, that what you want to do is to attract the best and the brightest, and by doing that, you have to then give these big salaries to get people in from the private sector. That being said, surely, if you're doing that, they then should have the wherewithal to improve the service that the patients are getting, which they're not, with 7 million people waiting on a primary waiting list and 12 million sitting on a secondary waiting list.
That argument, of course, it's been used. We hear the same argument said in like town halls and councils. The difference is in the private sector, they're allowed to say, well, we'll offer a competitive salary because their environment is a lot different. They have key performance metrics, they have objectives, they have to be consistently proving their worth. Whereas in the public sector, because it's grown to be the body that it is, it just means in the NHS specifically, you get essentially an unregulated, unmonitored influx of these people on these salaries without having their performance linked to it. And what we can see here is A&E waiting time times the average time that people are there might be going down since Wes Streeting has been involved. But the situation is still quite bad. The worst performing trust, East Cheshire, they had only 50.6% of patients being seen within 4 hours. I mean, how can you measure success in half? And they're earning over £350,000 a year. So the worst trusts are still having these senior managers, the director of people and culture, earning these ridiculous salaries.
And Joanna, are you going to do this annually?
We hope to.
Good. I'm very pleased to hear it. Thank you ever so much. I'm really grateful that you came on. Joanna Marchand there, spokeswoman of the Taxpayers Alliance. Well, joining me now is Lord Norman Warner, former Labour Health Minister. Good afternoon to you.
Hello.
What are your thoughts on this? I mean, there are two schools of thought here, that you need to pay good money to get really good managers. The NHS is a very complex beast, 200 billion quid every single year, 11.7% of GDP. But equally, you can't go around rewarding people for appalling performance where the patients aren't getting value for money and aren't being seen, and their operations are being constantly put on hold.
I think that's fair enough. I think a couple of points really I want to make. I think measuring salaries against the Prime Minister's salary is a fool's paradise. I mean, it's nuts. The reason is we don't pay our Prime Ministers enough, and it's an artificially low figure. So judging people against whether they're paid more or less than the Prime Minister doesn't work for me. However, I think the other main point in that analysis is relating pay to performance.
Yeah.
And I think the public I mean, I've worked in the public sector, and I think it's a long-standing problem of how do you actually relate chief executives in particular, their pay to performance. And most governments of all political persuasions have not wanted to introduce that. And I think we are ready now, I think, for a cultural change, particularly because of the huge variation in performance within these NHS trusts. So what I think the Taxpayers Alliance have done a good job of is actually showing that the pay bears no relationship whatsoever to the actual performance of the trust. And you can't be a chief executive and shrug your shoulders and say, well, there's nothing to do with me, Gov, because it's actually everything to do with me, Gov.
Absolutely right. I'm just looking at Anne James here, the former CEO of University Hospitals Plymouth NHS Trust, was paid £382,500, and the trust was 95th out of 136. So if you were in charge, would you then say, right, we're going to pay... There'll be parity across the board. So every chief executive, say, earns, let's say for the sake of argument, 170,000. Then there are targets on top of that. If X number of patients are seen within this, you get a bonus of this, and so on and so forth.
Well, I think the complexity of running some of these trusts is very variable.
Yeah.
I'm astonished that anyone in Plymouth should be required to be... You need to pay £300,000 to get a chief executive in Plymouth.
Good point.
I just don't actually think that makes sense. However, if you ask me, does it make sense to pay Callie Palmer in the Royal Marsden or the boss of Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital a big salary, I would say yes, because that is a world challenging job to do, and to get the very best you need that. So there's a huge difference between big London teaching hospitals and many relatively modest provincial acute trusts. And what we've got here is a nonsensical system which seems to almost make chief executives, if they're a chief executive of a trust, wherever they are, however complex, they get basically the same salary. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Isn't the problem here that you've essentially got very disparate organisations operating under the umbrella of the NHS, but actually they're autonomous units where they can set their own pay salaries and scales?
I think that's right. And what the Taxpayers Alliance have exposed is we need to bring in some people from what you might call HR consultancies to see what the market rates are in for an equivalent to, say, St Thomas's Hospital or the Plymouth Trust, and see what a private company would have to pay to get someone to do that job of that complexity. There's been as far as I'm aware, there's been no assessment of the complexity or otherwise of any of these particular trusts.
I mean, I tell you what, if you pay me $300,000, I'm very happy to go and run an NHS trust. I'll just put that out there. Can I just ask you about this other story, which is slightly at a tangent, but also on message as well. This is in the Telegraph today. 2 trans patients a day are having their penises removed on the NHS. £20 million in taxpayer money was spent on feminising genital surgery for biological men, including teenagers, over 3 years, including on an 18-year-old. They had irreversible surgery, which leaves them infertile. That can't be right, can it? There has to be an independent urgent review.
Well, there used to be a rule of thumb for doing things of that ilk on the NHS. And the requirement was that it affected your psychiatric health.
Yes.
I mean, and so if for example, you had tattoos, this used to come up with tattoo removal. If you had tattoo removals, which you had to do it in order to actually maintain the person's psychiatric health, then that was fair game. However, you also went on the waiting list. So there's 2 issues here. Did their psychiatric health require the operation, and did they wait their turn? And so I wouldn't say that 100% of these should never be done on the NHS. I think it's an issue of what were the rules of the game. And since we don't know what the rules of the game are now, I can't see that is actually going to appeal to the public, that piece of information.
I mean, I'm just reading here about a number of detransitioners have spoken about the brutal impact of the surgery. A chap called Richie Heron suing the NHS because he says that the mental health issues weren't actually addressed before the surgery was even contemplated. And of course, we've seen the CAS review as well being very clear about the way that we need to proceed going forward.
Well, I think that's just bad clinical practice, isn't it?
Really good to talk to you. Thanks ever so much. Lord Norman Warner there, former Labour Health Minister. Your thoughts on that, please. How much should we pay someone to run an NHS trust? Should it be parity across the board, dependent on the same geographical location? So, for example, 300,000 if you're in Plymouth, or 300,000 if you're running a London teaching hospital, which I would argue is much more complicated and much more important. Let me know your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000. We'll take a break. After the break, your calls, thoughts and messages. This is Talk.
Someone like Lucy Connolly, not a bad speck on her record, who is a childminder to kids from all different backgrounds, all different races, gets upset one day because little kids have been murdered, and she was thinking about the parents of those children.
Yeah, of course.
And she wrote something and then later deleted it thinking, this isn't me, this is not how I normally say things. Then she did plenty of tweets saying, you know, the rioting's dreadful, I wish it would stop. I mean, it's case closed.
Right.
The woman's not a threat to society. There's no reason for her to be in prison. The reason they've abolished her visitation rights is because they've made her a political prisoner.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is interesting. David, excuse me, this is Leslie. This freedom of speech that everybody in the UK and US is banging on about is so distorted it drives me nuts. We have so much freedom in this country. People are getting away with murder. How much more freedom does everyone want? Look at the outrageous things that entertainers get away with. And the vile stuff on social media, I agree with that. Speaker's Corner has been going on since the 70s or earlier. What you can't do is incite violence against other cultures and religions on both sides, which the media called hurty words. The government has to have a deterrent for everybody's protection, otherwise we end up in civil war. I don't agree, actually. When I was growing up, the television programmes were far riskier, much more risque than they are now. Everyone is concerned about what they can and can't say. Neil, Lord Warner quite rightly says the Prime Minister's salary is too low to entice the best candidate for the job, but I think the present incumbent is grossly overpaid, considering the effect he's having on the country. Nicely put, Neil. From Anthony in Selby, David, my son and his family moved to Poland last year and are in shock at how the United Kingdom is being destroyed. I'm so glad they got out in time and are now safe. That is so depressing. Hi, David. Great to see you. This is Sue in Essex. Good afternoon, Sue. I told my son-in-law to take my daughter and grandson to a better country. I said, don't let me hold you back. Oh, that's really depressing. David, it all started with the trade unions, not the members. The far left progressed from there and escalated until they controlled. They have inferiority complexes. Let's take a call. James is on the line from Hawkwell. Good afternoon, James.
Good afternoon, David. One of the things that struck me about the Lucy Connolly show, or the sheer madness of it all, but I recall back that the media don't really seem to be talking much about other things that have happened. And the one that I bring to mind is the when Nigel Farage had the milkshake thrown in his face, I then saw on television Joe Brand, the comedian, saying that it should have been battery acid.
I remember.
Now, that is absolutely outrageous.
Yes, I remember.
Do you remember that? Well, nobody is, in a parallel, bad things are said. This is unbelievable that nobody, she should be now marched away and dealt with if that is the way our justice system is working.
It's a really fascinating point because it seems fine. The establishment thinks it's okay to be vitriolic towards right-leaning parties.
Absolutely. And let's be honest about it. Starmer was head of the justice system, and he stands there and says, I don't know the facts of the case. Now, everybody in the country, let's say probably 99.9%, would probably say, we know about this case. And he stands there and actually says that he does not know the facts of the case, and that is outrageous.
It is outrageous, and also I'm just so shocked by the appeal because it's so obvious to everyone that the sentence is way out of proportion to what she actually did.
Absolutely, absolutely. But coming on to your question about Labour and the future, to be quite honestly, the way the country is going at the moment, I can't see any change. I think, unfortunately, we're going to get riots in the street because I think the way it's going and the different decisions that are being made are totally outrageous and against all what we feel is fair.
Do you know, I've never felt such a sense of people who are so disconnected and disaffected by the country and the people who govern us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It was bad enough when, I was always a Labour supporter way back. And then when Ed Miliband got in instead of his brother, who I thought his brother was probably more Blair-like, but when he got in, I thought, this is the end of it. And then, of course, it got worse with Jeremy Corbyn, and now we have Starmer. Well, perhaps your point about the NHS with paying more money to get better people, perhaps we ought to give more money for the Prime Ministers so we can get a better Prime Minister.
Very well said, James. Really good to talk to you this afternoon. That's James in Hawkwell. Peter Cardwell, good afternoon.
Hello,
it's very
David.
strange to meet in the afternoon.
In the hours of light.
I don't know what time of the day it is, I have to say.
See you, yeah.
Yes, I feel very jet-lagged.
Well, it's good to see you.
Nice to see
you. Again.
Yes, for the third day in a trot.
Yes, exactly. How's the show been?
Yeah, well, good, I hope.
Yeah, well, I've heard and seen it's been
that's very
fantastic.
kind. How's yours?
Well, we'll see.
Yeah, we will. I'll be sitting there. I'm driving, so I'll be listening.
Ah, very good.
Yeah, I might call in, actually.
You should. We'll see if we can maybe allow you on. We'll make a sound editorial decision about that. We're talking
Angry
about
David from the A12.
Yeah, exactly. Starmer's benefits U-turn, could it blow a $5 billion hole in the budget? Also, Farage challenging Keir Starmer to connect with working people. It's really interesting, the politicians who connect, isn't it?
I love that, by the way. What was it?
Go to a working men's club.
Yeah, so he challenged him to a sort of, a duel
That's
in,
right.
in a working man's club.
Go to a working man's club, see he gets on better. And actually, it's funny because
I know who my money's on.
Well, exactly. Farage has been smeared. Oh, he's a public schoolboy, da-da-da. Doesn't matter. You know, Boris Johnson, public schoolboy, he's still connected with many people, as does Farage. The White House in town pressuring Starmer over the Lucy Connolly case. We'll talk about that. Possible ceasefire in the Middle East that has been mooted but rejected by Israel. We'll get the latest on that. Army leaders told to be less shouty and more David Beckham. Does that include kicking Argentinians? That's what I want to know.
I saw that as well. Paul loves being shouted at in the army.
And Liverpool celebrating their title, an open-top bus parade that's happening as we speak.
Yeah.
The sad death of the English pub. This is a lovely article by an Irishman, actually, Rory Hanrahan, who's coming on a little bit later on. He manages 3 village pubs with his wife, and he's going to be telling us all about how it's sad that so many of them are closing, how important it is. We talk a lot about, very seriously, we talk about loneliness, talk about men